He never thought one rainy night would cost him everything. Not his job, not his reputation, but the wall he had spent 5 years building around his heart, brick by careful brick, to protect his daughter, and to protect himself from everything he was too afraid to want again. A single father, a quiet life, a city that never stopped raining. That was supposed to be enough. It was supposed to be safe. But safety, he would learn, has a way of dissolving the moment someone extraordinary steps into your car at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, soaking wet and completely unprepared to be human. If this story finds you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this goes. Hit like, stay until the end. This one's worth it. The alarm went off at 6:04 a.m., same as every morning, and Dylan Carter silenced it before the second buzz with the practiced reflex of someone who had long since stopped needing the noise to wake him. He was already awake. He was always already awake. He lay there for a moment in the gray half-light of his bedroom, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, the one the landlord had promised to fix 8 months ago, and listened to Portland doing what Portland did best in November. Raining. Not a dramatic rain, not the kind that made for good movie scenes, just a flat, steady, indifferent downpour that had been going on for 3 days straight and showed no sign of caring about anybody's commute. He got up. The apartment was small, but he had made it work. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that faced a brick wall, a living room that doubled as his office after 9 p.m. when Lily was asleep. It wasn't the kind of place you'd see in a lifestyle magazine, but the floors were clean and the heating worked, and there were drawings taped to the refrigerator, purple horses and lopsided suns, and one ambitious attempt at a dinosaur that Lily insisted was realistic. And that was enough. That had to be enough. He started the coffee first, then moved to Lily's room. She was 6 years old and she slept the way only children can. Completely, recklessly, one arm hanging off the mattress and her hair fanned out across the pillow like she had fallen from a great height and landed perfectly. Dylan stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at her, the way he did most mornings. Not out of sentimentality, exactly, more like a reflex. A check. She's here. She's fine. Keep moving. Lily, he touched her shoulder. Baby, come on. She groaned and pulled the blanket over her face. You've got school. Mrs. Patterson is going to wonder where you are. Mrs. Patterson smells like hand sanitizer, Lily said, muffled by the blanket. That's because she's very clean, which is a virtue. Let's go. It took another 4 minutes and the promise of the good cereal, the one with the colored marshmallows that Dylan had strong nutritional opinions about, but kept buying anyway, before she emerged, hair tangled, wearing one sock. Getting her dressed, fed, and to school by 7:45 was a choreography he had refined over 2 years of doing it alone. There were no wasted movements. He knew exactly which drawer the hairbrush was in, exactly how long her toast needed, exactly which battles were worth having before 7 a.m. and which ones weren't. The battle over the purple rain boots? Not worth it. She wore them. He dropped her at Eastside Elementary, watched her run through the rain toward the entrance without looking back. She never looked back. She was already somewhere else in her head, already in her next adventure, and he felt the particular mix of pride and loneliness that had become so familiar it barely registered anymore. He drove to work. Meridian Technologies occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building in the Pearl District that was aggressively modern in a way that felt like it was trying too hard. The lobby had exposed concrete, a living wall of plants that definitely cost more than Dylan's monthly rent, and a rotating art installation that a different colleague explained to him every few months and that he still didn't understand. The elevator played no music. Someone had once told him that was intentional, that silence projected confidence. Dylan had nodded and thought about the colored marshmallow cereal. He was a senior software engineer on the infrastructure team. He had been at Meridian for 3 years, long enough to know where the good coffee was hidden and which conference rooms had windows and which project managers sent emails at midnight and expected responses by morning. He was good at his job. Not the flashiest engineer on the floor, not the one who gave talks at industry conferences or had a presence on Tech LinkedIn, but the kind of person that teams quietly depended on. The one who found the problem nobody else had thought to look for, who stayed late without announcing it, who fixed things cleanly and without drama. He liked it that way. Invisible had its advantages when you were trying to keep your life from tipping over. His desk was in the open plan section on the 22nd floor near the windows, a position that would have been enviable if the windows didn't face directly into another building's HVAC units. He had a second monitor that he'd requested through 3 rounds of IT ticketing, a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest engineer" that Lily had picked out herself, and a cactus that he'd named Gerald and that he suspected was dying despite his best efforts. "Gerald looks worse," said Marcus, dropping into the chair beside Dylan's desk without invitation. Marcus Webb was Dylan's closest friend at Meridian, not by particular design, but by proximity and a shared contempt for unnecessary meetings. He was 35, perpetually over-caffeinated, and had the kind of comfortable confidence that came from genuinely not caring what most people thought of him. "Gerald's fine," Dylan said, not looking up. "Gerald has gone gray. Plants don't go gray, Dylan. That's a cry for help." "It's a cactus. They're supposed to look like that." "I'm looking up cactus care right now on my phone, and I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear." "Please don't." Marcus put his phone away. "You see the email this morning?" Dylan had seen 300 emails that morning, a number he found depressing even by his standards. "Be more specific." "The all-staff from HR. About the new leadership structure." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed office information. "They've appointed a new executive lead for the infrastructure and product divisions, effective immediately, someone from outside." Dylan finally looked up. "Outside the company, outside the city, outside our comfortable little ecosystem of mediocre sprint reviews and passive-aggressive Slack messages." Marcus paused for effect. "Victoria Langford." Dylan turned the name over. He'd heard it, vaguely, the way you hear names that exist at a level above your immediate ceiling. Victoria Langford was the kind of name that showed up in business publications he didn't read, and on conference keynote lineups he saw advertised but never attended. Late 30s, he thought. Ran a tech firm in San Francisco that had been acquired for something in the neighborhood of $400 million. Had a reputation for being, depending on who you asked, either a visionary or terrifying, possibly both. "She's coming here?" Dylan said. "She's already here. Apparently she's been in the building since yesterday doing a quiet assessment." Marcus raised his eyebrows significantly. "Quiet assessment, which means she's been watching." "You're being dramatic." "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." Marcus stood, straightening his jacket with unnecessary formality. "All I'm saying is, the next few weeks are going to be interesting. And by interesting, I mean anxiety-inducing. And by anxiety-inducing, I mean I've already stress-eaten an entire sleeve of crackers." Dylan turned back to his screen. He had a deployment review in 20 minutes and 2 dependency conflicts that had been quietly festering in the codebase for a week, and approximately 0 interest in office drama, executive reshuffling, or whatever performance theater came with a new boss trying to make her mark. He'd survived 3 leadership transitions at Meridian. He knew the pattern. New executive arrives, big meeting, some restructuring language, a couple of processes changed on paper but not in practice. Everything more or less continues as before. He went back to his code. Victoria Langford walked into the 22nd floor at 10:15 a.m., and the floor reacted the way floors react when someone with actual authority moves through them. A subtle shift in posture, a slight increase in keyboard activity, a few too casual glances that tried to look like they weren't glances. Dylan, to his credit, didn't look up. He was in the middle of tracing a memory leak that had been ruining his Thursday, and he wasn't going to let anything interrupt that, not even, "Carter?" He looked up. She was standing beside his desk, not hovering, standing, with the particular stillness of someone who didn't fidget, who wasn't anxious about her own presence in a room. She was maybe 5'6", dark hair pulled back with the kind of effortlessness that might have been deliberate or might have been genuine. He couldn't tell. And wearing a blazer that cost more than his car payment. She was holding a tablet. She looked directly at him, not at the general direction of him, which was oddly specific. "You wrote the load balancing layer," she said. It wasn't a question. Dylan blinked. "Yeah. About 8 months ago. Why?" "It's good." She said it the way people say things they mean, without the cushioning of social performance. It's the cleanest piece of architecture in this entire code base. I spent 4 hours with the repo last night, and yours was the only section I didn't want to rewrite. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. Thank you felt inadequate. I know felt arrogant. He landed on, there are still 2 edge cases I haven't resolved in the async queue. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. I saw those. Add them to your Q4 priorities. I want them closed before the infrastructure review in December. Yes, ma'am. Victoria. She said it without sharpness, just correction. Or Ms. Langford in formal settings. Ma'am makes me feel like I'm in a Western. And then she moved on. To the next desk, to Marcus, who Dylan could see was slightly short-circuiting. And Dylan sat there for a moment with a strange feeling he couldn't immediately name. It wasn't attraction, or it wasn't only attraction. It was more like the disorienting experience of being seen clearly by someone who had no obvious reason to look carefully. He'd been at Meridian for 3 years. His direct manager knew his name, reviewed his PRs, and that was more or less the extent of it. Victoria Langford had been in the building for 1 day and had read his code at 10 p.m. the night before. He went back to the memory leak. It took him another 40 minutes to find it, and when he did, it was so obvious in retrospect that he sat back and laughed. A small, tired laugh that nobody around him acknowledged because this was a tech floor, and that was the expected response to finding a bug. You always laugh when you fix things, said a voice. He turned. Victoria was back, or perhaps passing through again. He wasn't sure. She had a coffee now, from the good machine on the east side that most people didn't know about. Only the stupid ones, he said. The ones I should have caught earlier. That's most of them. She glanced at his screen briefly, not intrusively. How long did it take you? Too long. An hour. An hour for a memory leak is not too long. A week is too long. She seemed about to move on, then didn't. You have a kid? The question landed unexpectedly. He followed her gaze to the refrigerator drawing he'd taped to his monitor, the dinosaur. Lily had given it to him last month, insisting he put it somewhere he'd see it every day. He'd complied, then forgotten it was visible to anyone else. Daughter, he said. She's 6. The dinosaur is pretty good for 6. She thinks it's realistic. This time it was definitely a smile. Small, genuine, and gone quickly, like she'd let it out by accident. Good instinct. Confidence is worth more than accuracy at that age. And then she was gone, moving across the floor toward the conference rooms, and Marcus materialized beside Dylan's desk approximately 3 seconds later with the expression of a man who had witnessed something he intended to discuss at length. Did she just have a conversation with you? Marcus said. She asked about a drawing. Dylan, Marcus sat down slowly. She hasn't spoken more than 2 sentences to anyone on this floor except for the director, and those sentences were about deliverable timelines. He looked at the dinosaur drawing. That dinosaur is networking for you. Go away, Marcus. I'm just saying, the dinosaur is pulling more weight than you are. Please go away. The day moved the way days at Meridian moved, in meetings, in Slack threads that should have been emails, in 3 separate conversations about a deployment that everyone agreed was risky and nobody wanted to make the final call on. Dylan kept his head down, ate lunch at his desk, leftover rice and vegetables that he'd made in large batches on Sunday, the way he'd learned to do when there was no longer anyone to split cooking duties with, and clocked out at 5:30 on the dot, because Lily's after-school care ended at 6, and the city bus was not to be trusted in November rain. He picked her up damp and slightly frantic, having misjudged the crosswalk timing and gotten properly rained on for about 45 seconds. Lily presented him with a painting she'd made of what she described as you and me and a cat, though Dylan was fairly certain neither of them had a cat. We don't have a cat, he said, buckling her in. I know. She said this with the serenity of someone who found the observation irrelevant. I wanted one in the picture. What kind of cat is it? An orange one, named Kevin. Kevin is a solid cat name. I know. She held the painting up to the window, checking it against the rainy street outside, apparently satisfied with the comparison. Can we get Kevin? We have talked about this. You said we'll see last time. We'll see is not a yes. It's not a no. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was watching him with the particular calm of someone who understood leverage and was willing to exercise it over a long timeline. She was 6 years old. She had learned patience from somewhere that was definitely not him. Let's talk about Kevin later, he said. Okay. She looked back out the window. I like the rain. Yeah? It makes everything smell clean. He drove them home through rain-soaked streets, through the particular amber blur of Portland at dusk. The streetlights, the puddles, the steam rising from the coffee shop vents, the people hurrying with their shoulders up around their ears. He knew this city the way you know a city you've chosen to stay in for complicated reasons. Not with romance exactly, but with a kind of worn familiarity. He'd moved here 4 years ago. He'd still been married then. The apartment had been different, bigger, shared. A lot of things had been different. He didn't think about that much. There wasn't any use in it. He made dinner. Pasta, because it was Wednesday. And Wednesday was pasta, and the ritual of the week's meals was one of the small structures that kept things from feeling formless. Lily ate with the intensity of someone who had strong opinions about every bite and expressed them all. She was allergic to mushrooms, which she described as the worst plant, and Dylan kept them out of everything without exception. After dinner, homework, Lily's reading assignment, which she completed by reading it out loud to Dylan at twice the speed and questionable accuracy, then Dylan's own work laptop open on the kitchen table while she drew beside him, the two of them in their overlapping separate worlds. Dad? Miss Langford sounds scary. He looked up. Where did you hear about Miss Langford? You said her name on the phone to Marcus. Dylan made a mental note not to take work calls in rooms where his daughter was supposedly focused on other things. She's not scary, she's just very direct. Like how you're very direct when you find out I didn't brush my teeth. Exactly like that, but about software. Lily considered this. Does she have a dinosaur? She saw yours, actually, the one on my monitor. She said it was good. Lily's expression went through several stages, landing finally on something close to imperial satisfaction. Obviously, she said, and went back to drawing. He did 2 more hours of work after she went to bed, the apartment quiet except for the rain and the occasional car on the street below. The code review he'd promised his team lead by Friday was halfway done. The 2 async queue issues Victoria had flagged were in a document he'd started and then minimized because he wanted to think through the approach before committing to anything. He thought briefly about the way she'd said it's the cleanest piece of architecture in this code base. Flatly. No performance around it. He closed the laptop at 11 and went to bed. The rain didn't stop. The next 3 weeks were a study in adjustment. Victoria Langford, it turned out, was not interested in performing leadership. She was interested in executing it, which was a different thing entirely and considerably more uncomfortable for people who had grown accustomed to the gap between the two. She restructured the weekly team reviews, cutting them from 90 minutes to 40 by the simple method of not allowing tangents. She introduced a documentation requirement that made every senior engineer groan, and then within 2 weeks, quietly admit was probably overdue. She identified 2 projects that had been consuming resources at a significant rate with unclear deliverables and put them formally on review, a decision that created real tension with the product team and which she navigated with a steady patience that Dylan found, watching from a distance, genuinely impressive. She also, he noticed, knew when to be wrong. The first time he saw it, it caught him off guard. It was during a technical review of the December infrastructure rollout, the one with the risky deployment, and Victoria had been operating on an assumption about the database architecture that was, Dylan could see, about 3 versions out of date. He'd raised it carefully, braced for the particular kind of silence that means an executive is choosing whether to acknowledge or deflect. She had been silent for 2 seconds, looked at the diagram he'd pulled up and said, "You're right, I was working from old documentation. Let me rework my assumptions," and moved on. It was such a small thing, such a basic human thing. He'd watched 2 other executive-level leaders at Meridian handle being wrong in ways that consumed entire meetings and produced no actual corrections, and here she was just adjusting, moving forward, not making it into anything. He didn't say anything about it at the time, but he noticed. Marcus noticed that he'd noticed. "You have a look," Marcus said, over the terrible coffee from the West Side machine that they were using because the good one was being serviced. "I don't have a look." "You have the look you get when something is more interesting than you expected it to be. You had it when you found the memory leak last week. You have it after the team reviews now." "I'm just paying attention to the work." "Dylan, I've known you for 2 years. You pay attention to the work the same way every day. This is different." "Marcus, I'm genuinely asking you to let this go." "I'm just observing. Find something to observe on your own monitor." Marcus went back to his desk. Dylan went back to his code. And he told himself, clearly and firmly, the same thing he had been telling himself for 3 weeks. This was a professional environment. She was his executive lead. He was a single father with a 6-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old cactus that was dying. And the appropriate amount of attention to pay to Victoria Langford was the attention her role required. He believed this. He was mostly sure he believed it. The storm came on a Thursday. Not a metaphorical storm, an actual one. A Pacific front that the Weather Service had been tracking for days, and that had built into something considerably more aggressive than Portland's typical November offering. By 4 p.m., the wind was strong enough to knock the standing whiteboard in the conference room sideways, and the rain was coming in from an angle that made umbrellas essentially ornamental. Dylan checked his phone at 5:15 and found a message from Lily's after-school care facility that made his stomach drop. "Due to hazardous conditions, we're closing at 5:30 today. Please arrange early pickup." He was already shutting down his computer. The drive to Eastside Elementary took 20 minutes in normal conditions. In this weather, with half the city apparently making unplanned detours and 2 traffic lights out on Morrison, it took him 38, during which he listened to Lily's voicemail 3 times. She'd called from the office phone. She was with Miss Patterson. She was fine, but the weather is being dramatic. And gripped the steering wheel slightly too hard. She was fine. She was sitting in the brightly lit school office eating a granola bar and describing the storm to Ms. Patterson with evident delight when he arrived, damp and slightly out of breath, at 6:02. "The trees are bending," Lily told him gravely, "like they're bowing." "That's a good way to put it. Let's go." "Can I have another granola bar?" "In the car." He got her home, got her fed, got her into pajamas while the storm outside escalated from dramatic to genuinely unsettling, the kind of wind that found every gap in the window sills and reminded you the building was not as solid as it wanted to appear. Lily, who had announced she was not scared, fell asleep within 20 minutes, exhausted by the excitement of a day that had deviated from routine. Dylan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, trying to finish the code review. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. He had a backup battery for his router. He'd bought it after the last outage had cost him 4 hours of work, and he told himself it would hold. His phone rang at 8:47 p.m. Unknown number, but with a Portland area code. He answered. "Dylan Carter?" He recognized the voice before his brain had consciously processed it. Precise, even, with a quality of attention in it that was particular to one person in his professional life. "Miss Langford?" A brief pause. "Victoria, I apologize for calling directly. Marcus gave me your number. I need a favor, and I understand if it's not possible given the circumstances." Another pause, shorter. "My car has a flat tire. I'm at a gas station on 23rd, and I've been waiting for roadside assistance for an hour and a half. They've just informed me they're not able to come out tonight because of the conditions. I don't have anyone—" She stopped, edited herself. "I'm trying to find a way to get home." Dylan looked at the window, where the rain was performing against the glass. He looked at the direction of Lily's bedroom. He thought about several things in rapid succession. His car, the roads, the fact that his daughter was asleep and he'd never left her alone before even for an hour, the fact that his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, 2 doors down, had a key and had helped in emergencies before, the fact that 23rd was not far, the fact that Victoria Langford did not sound like a person who made this kind of call easily. "What's the cross street again?" he said. Another pause. Smaller this time. 23rd and Glisson. "I know where that is." He was already closing his laptop. "Give me 15 minutes. He knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. explained the situation in the condensed version, and was back in his car with his neighbor's promise to listen for Lily in 6 minutes. He drove through the storm with the particular focus of someone running on obligation and caffeine, following the GPS through streets that were already developing minor flooding at the low points, past downed tree branches and a traffic light swinging wildly on its cable, and found the gas station, its overhang lights amber through the rain, the attendant presumably watching weather coverage inside. At 9:08 p.m., Victoria Langford was standing under the overhang with her blazer collar turned up, her hair entirely undone from its usual arrangement, and the look of someone who had been managing her composure for a long time and was doing so by a narrowing margin. There was a sedan with an obviously flat rear tire pulled to the side, and she had a laptop bag over one shoulder and the expression of a person who was extremely used to being in control of situations and was working hard to extend that to situations in which she was demonstrably not. He pulled up and she opened the passenger door and got in. And for a moment they were just in the car together with the rain loud on the roof and the windshield wipers fighting the deluge, and she turned to him with something that wasn't quite composure but was trying to be. "Thank you," she said. And unlike a lot of things she said in the office, it sounded like it cost her something. "It's fine," Dylan said. "Where do we go?" She gave him an address in the West Hills, one of the neighborhoods that climbed the ridgeline above the city, where the houses sat behind trees and the views, on clear days, were significant. He plugged it into the GPS and pulled back onto 23rd, and the rain came down harder than ever, and the city shimmered and blurred around them, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. "I had the car serviced last month," Victoria said finally. Not as an explanation, more like she was speaking a thought she hadn't quite decided to keep. "Tires go whenever they want," Dylan said. "Doesn't matter when you last serviced it. That's the kind of thing people say when they're being generous. That's the kind of thing that's true." He glanced at the rearview mirror, old habit from checking on Lily, and caught his own eyes looking more alert than he felt. "How long were you standing out there?" "An hour and 40 minutes. In this weather. There was an overhang." "Victoria, it's 40 degrees. She was quiet. Then, "I didn't want to call someone from the office. It seemed," she searched for the word, "inappropriate, to ask someone who reports to me for a personal favor. And yet here you are. And yet here I am." A beat. "You were the only one Marcus said was reliably," his word was steady. "He said you were steady." Dylan let that sit for a moment. Marcus, for all his chaos, was occasionally perceptive. "My daughter is home," Dylan said. "My neighbor is listening for her, so I need to know if you're actually okay or if we need to make any other stops." She turned to look at him, properly looked, not the quick professional assessment she usually deployed. "I'm fine. I'm just cold and I was handling it, and I am genuinely grateful that you came." "Okay." He turned onto the bridge approach, the river below hidden in black and rain. "Then we go to your place and you warm up and I head back." "Yes," she said. The music that was playing on the radio, something ambient and low, a late-night station that he kept on for the background of it, ran underneath the sound of the storm, and the city moved past the windows in streaks of light, and Victoria Langford sat in the passenger seat of his 5-year-old Subaru with her composure slightly undone and her hair damp at the edges. And Dylan drove because driving was something he could do without thinking, and thinking was something he needed to keep at a manageable level right now. "Your daughter," she said, after a while. "Is she with her mother?" The question was neutral, not intrusive, just the natural follow-up to what he'd mentioned. "No," Dylan said. "It's just us." Victoria nodded, didn't press. He appreciated that. The not pressing. Most people pressed, because silence about that particular topic read as invitation, and he had spent 2 years learning to redirect the conversation before the sympathy could set in, because sympathy was its own kind of weight. "How long?" she asked. He glanced at her. She was looking out the windshield, not at him, asking without demanding an answer. 2 years, he said. "Divorce, we're fine. I mean, Lily's fine. We're both fine." You said fine twice. It's a fine situation. And that got him something he hadn't expected, a small, genuine laugh. Not a polite social laugh, an actual one, slightly surprised. It happened quickly, and she reeled it back with the practiced ease of someone who laughed less than she used to, but it had been real. He felt it the same way you feel a key find the right lock, not dramatically, but with a quiet, unmistakable click. He kept his eyes on the road. The GPS told him to turn, and he turned, and the streets began to climb, and the city dropped away below them in a scatter of lights blurred by the rain, and the storm followed them all the way up the hill. He would think about that click later, in the quiet of his apartment with Lily asleep, and Gerald the cactus slowly dying on the windowsill, and the rain finally beginning to ease. He would think about it, and he would not do anything with it. That was the plan, anyway. Her house was the kind that announces itself without trying. Set back from the road behind a gate that opened on a sensor, a house that was large without being ostentatious, all clean lines and warm light behind tall windows. Dylan pulled into the driveway, and Victoria reached for the door handle and then stopped. She was looking at the gate, which was standing open, and at the puddles on the path that led to the front door, and at something in her posture shifted, something he wouldn't have caught 3 weeks ago but was beginning to be able to read, a subtle deflation, a moment of unguardedness. "I'd invite you in," she said, and the sentence sounded like it had started in a different place than where it ended. "But that's—" "You don't have to," Dylan said. "No, I know." She paused. "But it's late, and those roads are getting worse, and there's a live traffic advisory that the highway is closed further south." She looked at him. "You'd be driving in this for an hour to get back to the city." "I've driven in worse." "Dylan?" She said his name the same way she said everything, evenly, directly, without trying to make it into more than it was. "It's a large house. I have a guest room. It makes practical sense for you to wait until the storm breaks or morning, whichever comes first." He thought about Lily. Mrs. Chen was there. He texted her quickly. "Storm is worse, might be a couple hours. You okay to stay until I get back?" Mrs. Chen's reply came in 30 seconds. "Of course, honey. Don't rush. She's fine." He looked at his phone, then at Victoria, who was watching him with the expression of someone who had offered something and was already preparing to take it back gracefully if refused. "Practical sense," he said. "Yes. That's one way to put it." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite the smile again, but in that territory. "It's the only way I know how to put things," she said. He turned off the engine. They went inside. The inside of the house was warm and quiet in the particular way that large, well-built spaces are quiet. Not empty, but settled. There was a foyer that opened into a living room with high ceilings and bookshelves that actually looked used, not decorative. A kitchen that was bigger than his entire apartment, but managed, somehow, to feel inhabited. A few things on the counter that suggested a person actually lived here. A half-finished crossword, a coffee mug, a small plant that was surviving considerably better than Gerald. "Guest room is upstairs," Victoria said, setting down her laptop bag. Her blazer was damp at the shoulders. She looked, Dylan thought, more like herself somehow. Whatever that meant. Less composed, maybe. Or composed in a different way. "I'll get you dry things. Or at least, I'll find dry things." "Victoria." She turned. "You should warm up first," he said. "You were standing in 40-degree rain for almost 2 hours." She opened her mouth, closed it. It was the specific expression of someone who was used to managing everyone else's logistics and had briefly forgotten that she had her own. "I'm fine," she said. There's that word again. Another surprised laugh. Smaller this time. She pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth as if checking that it had happened. "I'll change," she said finally. "And then I'll find you something. And then—" She hesitated. "I was going to make something to eat. I haven't eaten since noon." "I can help," Dylan said. It came out simply, without calculation. She studied him for a moment. The rain was still audible on the windows. The house was warm. "Okay," she said. And that was how it started, or how it continued, or how something that had been very quietly building in the ordinary spaces of 3 professional weeks found, in the extraordinary space of a storm, a different quality of room. Not with drama, not with declaration, just with the small, Unremarkable, entirely human act of two people in a warm kitchen deciding, without ceremony, to cook. The kitchen was bigger than it needed to be for one person, and Victoria moved through it with the careful efficiency of someone who cooked occasionally but not habitually, opening the wrong cabinet first, correcting without acknowledgement, finding things in the second or third place she looked rather than the first. Dylan noticed this and said nothing about it. He'd been in enough kitchens to know that commenting on how someone navigated their own space was the fastest way to make them self-conscious in a place where they shouldn't have to be. She had changed into something simpler, dark slacks, a plain gray sweater that looked soft in the way expensive things sometimes did without advertising it, and her hair was still slightly damp at the ends, but no longer in the formal arrangement the office demanded. She looked, Dylan thought carefully, and then immediately less carefully, like a different iteration of the same person. Not softer, exactly. More settled, maybe. Like a photograph that had been slightly out of focus finally finding its adjustment. He pushed that thought aside and looked at the refrigerator. "What do you have?" he asked. "Eggs, some cheese. There's pasta. I think there's pasta." She opened a cabinet, found it. "Onions, some vegetables that are probably still good. I travel a lot. My grocery habits are unreliable." "That's enough." "For what?" "For dinner." He moved to the counter beside her, not crowding, just occupying the space that cooking required. "You have a pan?" She found a pan. It was a good one, heavy-bottomed, clearly quality, and equally clearly not used frequently. He turned on the burner and she stood slightly back, watching him with the expression of someone accustomed to delegating tasks and momentarily uncertain whether that applied here. "You can cut the onion," he said. "I can do that." "The knife block is behind you." She turned, selected a knife, and Dylan watched from his peripheral vision as she cut the onion with the methodical precision of someone applying professional standards to an unfamiliar task. Each slice even, deliberate, arranged on the cutting board with unnecessary tidiness. "You cut like an engineer," he said. She looked up. "What does that mean?" "Consistent intervals, optimizing for uniformity." She looked at the onion slices. "Is that wrong?" "It's not wrong, it's just, you don't have to make them all the same size for this." "I'm aware." A beat. It's how I do things." He understood that more than he expected to. He cracked eggs into a bowl without measuring anything, added cheese by feel, seasoned with the confidence of someone who had been cooking the same way for years because there was nobody else to do it, and he'd had to get competent fast. The kitchen smelled of butter and onion and rain-washed air from somewhere, a window cracked somewhere that the storm found. "You cook for your daughter every night?" Victoria asked. "Most nights. Take out on Fridays. It's the deal we have." "What's the Friday rule?" She picks, which means it's usually the Thai place on Burnside, because she has decided pad Thai is her personal identity. Victoria made a sound that was almost amusement. "At 6. She's very committed to it. He tilted the pan, watching the eggs begin to set. She also has strong opinions about what constitutes a legitimate breakfast cereal, which superhero would win in a fight against weather, and whether Kevin the hypothetical cat deserves to exist. Kevin the hypothetical cat. Long story. Short version, she drew a picture with a cat in it and now considers the cat a family member despite being fictional. She named a fictional cat Kevin. It's a very dignified name for a cat, apparently. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Dylan plated the eggs, added the onion, found bread in the cabinet she'd indicated, and put it in the toaster that sat on the counter beside a small succulent that was, he noted, considerably healthier than Gerald. "My cat was named Archie," Victoria said. He looked up. She said it like she hadn't entirely planned to. "Was?" "He died 4 years ago, 17 years old." She moved to the kitchen island, settled onto one of the stools with the careful manner of someone sitting down in their own home like it was a chair at a meeting. "I got him in college. He moved with me through a lot of iterations of my life." She picked up her water glass, turned it slightly. "I haven't gotten another one. I kept meaning to." Dylan brought the plates over, set one in front of her. She looked at it and then at him, and there was something briefly visible in her expression that he didn't try to name. "Thank you," she said. again with that quality of it costing something. Don't thank me yet. It's scrambled eggs. It's scrambled eggs at 10 p.m. when I haven't eaten since noon and it's raining hard enough to be structural damage. She picked up her fork. The bar is exactly where it needs to be. They ate. The storm continued its argument with the windows. The kitchen was warm and the light was low. She turned off the overhead and left the under-cabinet lights on, which she seemed to do automatically, without thinking about it, and which made the space feel different than it would have under fluorescence. More like a kitchen, and less like a demonstration of what a kitchen should look like. The eggs were fine, nothing special. Dylan was aware that he'd made better, and also that the circumstances were doing a lot of work. And he was aware of being aware of that, which was the particular kind of hypervigilance he'd developed 2 years ago and never fully dismantled. "How did you end up in Portland?" he asked. The question was safe, professional adjacent, the kind of thing you could ask without it meaning anything. Victoria finished a bite before answering. The acquisition. When Meridian bought Langford Analytics, there were options. I could have stayed in San Francisco, brought in a manager to oversee the Portland division from a distance. That's what most people would have done. She considered her plate. I don't operate well from a distance. No, Dylan said. You don't. She looked at him. That sounds like an observation. It is one. And? It's not a criticism. He set down his fork. You read code at 10 p.m. the night before you walked onto our floor. You memorize names before your first meeting. You know which projects are bleeding resources, and you're not afraid to say it. He shook his head slightly. You operate close to everything. It's just how you work. She held his gaze for a moment with the particular stillness that was hers. Not discomfort, not calculation, just looking. Most people find it excessive, she said. Most people find it threatening. He picked his fork back up, which isn't the same thing. Something shifted at the edge of her composure, not breaking but adjusting, the way a door shifts in its frame when the pressure on the other side changes. She looked at her plate and then back out at the kitchen, at the rain on the dark window. My team in San Francisco told me I was too involved, she said. It came out with the flatness of something that had been processed and filed but not fully resolved. Too in the details. That a CEO's job is vision and delegation, not architecture reviews at midnight. A brief pause. They weren't wrong, technically. But I built that company from a 2-person consulting firm to something worth $400 million by being in the details. She said it without pride. As a fact, stated the way you state facts you've made peace with. Delegation is a skill I'm still acquiring. Dylan thought about the meeting 3 weeks ago. The wrong assumption, the 2-second pause, the clean correction. You're better at it than you think, he said. She looked at him again, held the look a beat longer than the previous ones. You're surprisingly easy to talk to, she said, for someone who barely speaks in team meetings. I speak when I have something to say. That's rarer than you'd think at the executive level. At the engineering level, too, honestly. She almost smiled. The almost smile had become familiar in a way he was trying not to track too carefully. What happened with your marriage? She asked, and then immediately, you don't have to answer that. I know. He didn't rush to fill the space. The rain filled it instead, briefly, and he let it. She left. Or, we left each other, really, but she was the one who said it first, which means, in the telling, it always sounds like she left. He moved a piece of toast around his plate without eating it. We were good together for a while. We wanted different things for the next part. And then it was just the slow version of over, which is sometimes worse than the fast version because you keep thinking it might still change. Does Lily know? She knows her mom lives in Seattle now and comes to visit. She knows we're not together. Kids are better at accepting the reality than the explanation, I found. She asked me once if I was sad, and I told her I was sometimes, and she said okay and moved on, which was honestly the right response. Victoria nodded slowly. My mother asked me 3 separate times in 1 year why I wasn't married, she said, and the turn from his disclosure to hers was quiet, like one hand passing something to another. Not in a concerned way, in a disappointed way, as if the company and the acquisition and the move were all very well but fundamentally beside the point. Is she right? Victoria looked at him with an expression that was hard to read, not offended, but recalibrating. She's my mother. She has a very specific idea of what my life should look like, and I've spent 30 years alternating between trying to meet it and not caring that I can't. She set down her fork. The answer to your question is that I don't know. I've been moving so continuously for so long that I'm not sure I've left enough stillness to find out. The word landed between them, stillness, and hung there with the weight of something that had been said more precisely than intended. Dylan looked at her. She was looking at the counter, at her water glass, at the rain, not avoiding him, processing. He'd noticed that about her in the office, too, the way she didn't fill silence with performance, didn't rush to smooth things over. She just sat in what was true, even when what was true was uncomfortable. He respected that more than he knew how to say without it sounding like more than it was. I should let you get some sleep, he said. She looked up, and there it was again, that brief unguardedness, gone almost before it arrived. The guest room is at the top of the stairs, she said. First door on the left. There should be... I'll get you something to wear, or I can look for something. Victoria. Thank you for the onion, he said. She stopped, and this time the smile came fully, not contained, not adjusted, just there, real and sudden and a little startled, the smile of someone who had not expected to be made to laugh in their own kitchen on a Thursday night in a storm. It lasted only a few seconds, and then she pressed her lips together and looked away, but it had been complete. A whole smile. The first one he'd seen. He carried his plate to the sink and rinsed it, because that was what you did, and she did not tell him not to. And they moved around each other in the kitchen in the natural adjacency of two people cleaning up after a shared meal, and the storm hammered the windows, and the house was warm, and neither of them said anything else that needed to be said. He found the guest room without difficulty. It was clean and quiet and impersonal in the way guest rooms are when they're not used often. A room that is ready but not lived in. He sat on the edge of the bed and texted Mrs. Chen, who replied that Lily was still sleeping and everything was fine and he should stop worrying. He set an alarm for 5:45. He looked at the ceiling, which had no water stains. He thought about the smile. He told himself firmly not to think about the smile. He turned off the light. Outside, the storm was reaching its full argument, rain and wind together, the kind of weather that in the morning would leave branches across roads and reveal which trees had been compromised by years of quiet rot. But inside the house on the West Hills Ridge, everything was settled and warm, and the sound of the rain on the roof was, he had to admit, easier to sleep to than the sound of rain on a city apartment window with HVAC units 20 feet away. He slept better than he had in weeks. He didn't think about what that meant, or he thought about it briefly in the half space between waking and sleep, and then let it go, because that was the sensible thing, and Dylan Carter was a sensible man who had built a careful life that worked, and who understood, from experience, the particular cost of wanting things that could complicate what you'd built. He let it go. The storm disagreed and kept going. The morning came gray and washed out, the kind of morning that follows big weather. Everything slightly altered, the air clear and cold, the damage inventoried in downed branches and pooled water. Dylan was awake by 5:30, before his alarm, old habit. He dressed in yesterday's clothes, which was not ideal, and went downstairs expecting to navigate a quiet exit with minimal complication. Victoria was already in the kitchen. She was at the counter with a coffee, her own mug, the one he'd seen on the counter last night, now washed and refilled, and she was reading something on her phone with the focused expression she wore in the office. She had her hair back again, the working arrangement. She had apparently been up for a while. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "Coffee," she said, indicating the machine. He poured a cup and stood at the counter, and they were quiet for a moment, which was not uncomfortable. And Dylan was aware that the specific quality of a silence was information, that this one, the morning after silence in the kitchen of a woman he worked for, was not tense or awkward, but simply present in the way that honest things are present. "Roads look clear enough," Victoria said, still looking at her phone. "The highway advisory was lifted at 4 a.m. "I saw." He'd checked already. "I need to get back before Lily's up." "Of course." She set her phone down. She seemed about to say something that was in a different register than logistics, and then she said the logistical thing instead. I'll arrange for the car to be towed and the tire replaced this morning. Good. Another silence. She turned her mug between her hands. Last night, she started. Was fine, Dylan said. She looked at him. I was going to say thank you. I know, you don't have to. I do, actually. She said it the way she said things she meant, without inflection layered over the surface. You came out in that storm without hesitation. You didn't make it into anything. You just... She stopped. Came. He looked at her across the counter and thought about the smile and thought about the eggs and thought about the word stillness and thought about the cost of wanting things. Drive safe, he said. She nodded, and then, Dylan? He was at the doorway already. He turned. Lily's dinosaur, she said, and stopped, and then tried again. Tell her I said it's the best piece of art on the 22nd floor. He stood there for a moment with that. She'll want to know your name, he said. Victoria. She'll probably remember it. I'll consider that a privilege, Victoria said. And she meant it, and he could tell she meant it, and that was somehow the most disarming thing she had said in the entire span of their strange, storm-shaped evening together. He drove home through a city that was reassembling itself after the weather, past crews clearing branches from roads and traffic lights restored to function, and the ordinary machinery of Portland returning to its ordinary motion. He drove with the window cracked because the air was different after a big storm, genuinely clean, and Lily was right about that, he thought. It did smell clean. Mrs. Chen met him at the door with the expression of a woman who knew more than she was saying and had decided to say none of it, which he appreciated. Lily was still asleep. He sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee he'd brought in the car and looked at the refrigerator and at the dinosaur drawing that was not on the refrigerator but on his monitor at the office. And he thought about the fact that in 6 hours he was going to walk back into Meridian Technologies and sit at his desk 20 feet from the memory of this and have to navigate the particular professional challenge of knowing someone in 2 registers simultaneously. The one where she was his executive lead who reviewed deliverable timelines and had opinions about his codebase, and the one where he'd watched her cut an onion with engineer's precision and had seen her smile for the first time. He didn't have a plan for that. He would figure it out. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:52, hair catastrophic, wearing the pajamas with the small planets on them that she had chosen herself from 3 options last spring, and which she now wore with the unswerving loyalty of someone committed to a brand. You weren't here, she said. Not accusatory, observational. The storm, Dylan said. I had to help someone. Mrs. Chen was here. I know, she made me hot cocoa. Lily climbed into her chair and looked at him with the particular gravity of a 6-year-old performing an assessment. Was the person okay? Yeah, Dylan said. She's okay. Lily absorbed this. Good, she said, and reached for the cereal, and the morning resumed its familiar shape, and the storm was over, and everything was almost exactly as it had been before. Almost. That was the word that kept coming back to him over the next 4 days. Almost. As in, the office was almost the same as before. His relationship with his own work was almost the same. His ability to sit in the weekly infrastructure review and pay attention to the content and only the content was almost the same. The almost was doing a lot of work, and it was doing it quietly, in the background, the way the most structural changes tend to operate. Victoria, for her part, was professional with an exactness that might have read as deliberate or might simply have been Victoria being Victoria, direct, focused, consistently herself. She gave his async queue fixes a thorough code review and commented specifically on 3 decisions he'd made, 2 approvals, and 1 pushback that he read and thought about and ultimately agreed with, which he noted in the PR and she acknowledged with a single-line response that was entirely technical. In the team meeting that week, she called on him twice, once for his assessment of the December deployment risk and once about a dependency issue in the new service layer. And she listened with the same quality of attention she'd given him in the car, which was real and complete and made you feel, unsettlingly, like your thoughts deserved to be taken seriously. He was managing fine. He was almost managing fine. Marcus, inevitably, was not going to let this continue without commentary. You're different, Marcus said, on Tuesday, by the coffee machine. I'm not different, Dylan said. You're, I don't know, less somewhere else. That's not an intelligible observation. You know how you usually seem like 80% present? Like the other 20% is always somewhere? Thinking about Lily's pickup or the code issue or whatever? Marcus looked at him with uncomfortable accuracy. You're 100% present this week. It's strange. Maybe I got good sleep. Did you? Marcus? There's nothing to just. Dylan picked up his coffee. Drop it. Marcus picked up his own coffee. She approved your Q4 resource request, he said, changing vectors. Full approval. 3 extra engineering days, no questions asked. I heard from Priya in Ops. Dylan had seen that email. He'd sat with it for a moment because the approval had been thorough. Not just the days, but with a note about prioritization that made clear she'd actually read the request and agreed with the reasoning rather than rubber stamping it. She approved the resource logic because it was a sound request, he said. Priya said she approved 8 other requests this week and wrote one-line notes on all of them. Yours had a paragraph. Dylan said nothing. I'm not implying anything, Marcus said. You are absolutely implying something. I'm implying that the senior engineer who drove her home in a storm is getting paragraph-length resource approvals. He raised both hands. Make of that what you will. I will make of it that she's thorough, Dylan said, and went back to his desk. He made of it slightly more than that. He did not share this with Marcus. The week continued. The async queue fixes were merged. The December deployment plan was revised twice and then provisionally approved pending one more architecture review that Victoria had scheduled for the following week. Dylan attended a parent-teacher conference for Lily on Wednesday afternoon. Ms. Patterson said Lily was doing well in reading, had strong creative instincts, and occasionally narrated her own actions in the third person during art class, which was charming if slightly theatrical. And he drove home thinking about the word theatrical, and about Lily, and about how much she had of him, and how much she had of Sarah, and how the proportions were becoming clearer as she got older. He had not heard from Victoria outside of the office. He had not expected to. He had not wanted to. He had wanted, with the boring reliability of a sensible person, to have clearly delineated contexts in which the relevant thoughts belonged, and he was maintaining those delineations with the vigilance of someone who knew from experience what happened when you stopped. On Friday, Lily got pad thai. On Friday evening, while Lily was asleep and Dylan was doing code review at the kitchen table, his phone lit up with a message from an unknown number that he recognized by the Portland area code. The tire was replaced. The car is back. I wanted to let you know. He stared at it. Also, a second message arrived. I told my assistant to order a different plant for the office, something harder to kill than whatever your cactus has been attempting. He sat with that for a moment. With the particular texture of it, the functional message, and then the second one, which was not functional at all. Which was something else. Which was, if he was reading it accurately, the smallest possible extension of an acknowledgement that what had happened last Thursday existed outside the professional record. He typed, Gerald is not dead yet. He's resting. He stared at what he'd typed. He sent it. 3 minutes passed. He had gone back to the code review and was telling himself credibly that there would be no reply, that the message had been a courtesy, the follow-up an impulsive addition, and that was the end of it, when his phone lit up again. Gerald is a terrible name for a cactus. Lily named him, he typed. Then Gerald is an excellent name for a cactus, came back, almost immediately. He looked at that for a moment too, at the speed of it, at the absence of the 2-second professional pause she used in meetings when something caught her off guard. He put his phone face down on the table and went back to the code review. He was almost, that word again, smiling. He let himself, briefly, in the privacy of his own kitchen at 11 p.m. with Gerald slowly persisting on the windowsill and Lily's week's drawings spread on the counter beside him, and the city doing the low-key Friday version of its noise outside. He let himself acknowledge, with the careful precision of a man who had spent 2 years deciding what he was and was not allowed to feel, that he was in a situation that was becoming complicated. Not impossible, not inappropriate, not anything that had crossed a line or needed to be addressed or fixed. Just complicated. In the way that things become complicated when two people who exist in a structured professional relationship have also, in the span of a storm, eaten scrambled eggs together at 10 p.m. and talked about cats that died and marriages that ended and mothers who disapproved and the cost of moving too fast through your own life to feel where you are. He thought about what Marcus had said. 100% present. He thought about Lily's question that morning. Was the person okay? And about how readily she had accepted the answer and moved on. She was better than him at that, he thought. She was better at him at a lot of things, which was equal parts humbling and reassuring. And he wasn't sure how she'd gotten to be that way at 6 years old, but he was glad. He finished the code review. He closed the laptop. He went to Lily's room and looked at her the way he did most nights. She's here, she's fine, keep moving. And then went to bed. The city was quiet in the way it was quiet on clear nights after rain, when the clouds had moved on and left the sky sharp and cold. And if you looked up from the right place in Portland, you could sometimes see stars even through the light pollution. He didn't look up. He went to sleep. But the message thread on his phone stayed open, unarchived, the way you leave a door slightly ajar without deciding to. Not a declaration, not a plan. Just open. The following Monday, he walked into Meridian and sat at his desk and turned on his computer and looked at the dinosaur drawing on his monitor and at Gerald, who was perhaps slightly grayer than last week, and opened his code editor, and the day began. Victoria Langford walked onto the floor at 10:05, coffee in hand, moving through the open plan with her usual directness. She stopped at 2 desks before his, a question about the service layer, an update on the deployment timeline, and Dylan was looking at his screen when she reached his desk, and he did not look up immediately, and when he did, she was already looking at him, not with the professional assessment, with something slightly different, with the look of someone who knows a thing that cannot be referenced in this context but hasn't stopped knowing it. "Carter," she said. "Even. Professional. All the surfaces in order." "Morning," he said. "The architecture review is moved to Thursday. I'll send the updated invite." "Got it," she nodded. Moved on. Past Marcus, who was watching Dylan from the periphery with the expression of a man taking notes, toward the conference rooms, carrying everything as she always did, steadily, with no visible effort. Dylan looked back at his screen. His coffee was still hot. The week was already different from last week, which had been different from the week before, and he was beginning to understand that the accumulation of these differences was not noise, it was data. It was the story telling him what it was, the way stories do, not in declarations, but in the quiet, consistent pressure of things that keep happening. He opened his code editor. He got to work. He did not think very much about Thursday. He thought about it a moderate amount. Gerald sat on the windowsill behind him, gray and persistent, and outside the window, Portland had gone back to its ordinary rain, and somewhere across the floor, Victoria Langford was in a conference room being precisely, relentlessly, professionally herself. And the distance between that version of her and the version that had smiled suddenly in a warm kitchen at 10 p.m. on a storm Thursday was exactly as far as it needed to be. And Dylan was beginning to suspect, not quite as far as he'd thought. The architecture review on Thursday went long. Not because anything went wrong. It went long because it went right, in the way that good technical conversations go right, which is to say it opened more questions than it closed, and everyone in the room was engaged enough to actually pursue them. Dylan had come prepared. He'd spent 2 evenings rebuilding the deployment risk assessment from scratch after Victoria's pushback the previous week, and the new version was cleaner, with the 2 structural weaknesses addressed and a fallback protocol that the previous draft had been missing entirely. He'd walked into the conference room at 9 a.m. knowing his material and knowing it well, which was a different feeling from knowing it adequately, and the difference showed. Victoria had run the meeting from the head of the table with the efficiency that was hers. Clear agenda, no digressions permitted, every technical objection given its exact amount of airtime before being resolved or tabled. She'd pushed back on 2 of Dylan's assumptions with the flat directness he'd come to expect, and which still, 2 weeks in, he found he preferred to the softened corporate versions of disagreement he'd navigated before her arrival. She was wrong about one of them, and right about the other, and they'd worked through both in the meeting without drama, and when the session closed at 11:10, she'd said the revised plan was ready for final sign-off, and thanked the room in the specific way she thanked rooms. Not effusively, not as performance, but as acknowledgement. Dylan was gathering his laptop when she said, without looking up from her notes, "Good work on the fallback protocol. That was the gap." He stopped. "I know," he said, because it was true. She did look up then, briefly, with the expression that wasn't quite amusement but lived in that neighborhood. "Yes," she said, "you do." He went back to his desk. Marcus appeared within 60 seconds, which was faster than usual, which suggested he'd been waiting. "The way she said good work just then," he said, sitting down without invitation. "That was, for Victoria Langford, good work is basically a standing ovation. She gives credit where it's due. I've seen her do it with 3 other engineers this month." "Sure, but she doesn't make eye contact with the other engineers when she does it." "Marcus, if the next word is observing, I'm going to ask IT to move my desk." Marcus held up his hands in the gesture of someone surrendering the field without actually surrendering anything. He went back to his own desk. Dylan opened his code editor. What he didn't share with Marcus, what he was becoming increasingly disciplined about not sharing with anyone, was that the text messages had continued, not frequently, not in a way that would read as anything definitive to anyone who found them, because they were not definitive. They were exactly as ambiguous as the space between them required them to be. Victoria had sent him an article about cactus care 3 days after the storm, no message attached, just the link. He'd read it, found it genuinely useful, and replied with a photograph of Gerald in which Gerald looked objectively better than he had the previous week. She'd replied, "Marginal improvement. Don't get attached." He was already attached to Gerald. He'd been attached to Gerald for a 1.5 years. He did not say this. She'd messaged him once on a Sunday evening with a question about the async queue fix that was ostensibly technical, but which could have waited until Monday, and which they both understood, without acknowledging it, had been sent on a Sunday evening. He'd answered it, fully and technically, and she'd replied thank you, and then, after a pause, "Are you always working on Sundays?" He'd looked at that for a moment. "Not always," he'd typed. "Lily had a birthday party to go to this afternoon. I'm filling the quiet." How was the party? 11 6-year-olds in a room with a piñata. It was an event. Did the piñata survive? Nothing survived. She'd sent back a single emoji. Not a laugh emoji, but a small, dry face that communicated exactly the right register of amusement without overdoing it, which was so precisely her that he'd had to put his phone down for a moment. This was the texture of things going into the 3rd week of December. Contained. Professional during working hours. Existing in a different key outside of them, but quietly, without pressure, without declaration. Dylan had decided, with the deliberateness of a man who had made bad decisions before and paid for them at length, that he was not going to do anything about whatever this was until he knew what it was. And he was not going to know what it was until it decided to be something, and it had not decided to be something yet, and that was fine. That was the correct posture. He maintained this posture with reasonable success right up until the Tuesday before Christmas, when Priya from operations stopped by his desk at 2 p.m. with the specific expression of someone who has information they have decided to share and have been waiting for the right moment. Priya was 28, competent, and deeply embedded in the informal information network that ran parallel to every official org chart Dylan had ever worked within. She was not malicious. She was, however, extremely interested in the texture of things, which was a trait Dylan had found useful when it was directed elsewhere and mildly uncomfortable when it pointed at him. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said, without looking up. "How's the deployment prep going?" "Fine." "On track?" "Good." A pause. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. Her expression told him the question was not about the deployment. "Sure." "People are talking," she said. Not unkindly. Carefully, the way you say something you think the other person might not have registered yet. "About you and Victoria." The room did not change. The sound of the floor did not change. Dylan's expression did not change, or he controlled it well enough that the change was not visible. "Talking how?" he said. "Just talking. You know how it is." Priya's discomfort was visible now, a slight contraction around the eyes. The architecture review went long, and people noticed the way it's nothing specific, just comments. The kind of thing that starts as nothing and then isn't nothing anymore if nobody addresses it. Dylan looked at her steadily. What kind of comments? She shifted slightly. That the resource approval was faster than usual for your team, that she knows your name in a different way than she knows other names, that someone saw the two of you in the parking garage Wednesday morning and the way you She stopped. Look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong happening. I'm saying other people are saying things, and I thought you should know because She searched for the word. Private. You don't track this kind of thing, and it's better to know. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. Seriously, I appreciate you telling me. Priya nodded, relieved that this had not gone worse, and went back to her desk. Dylan looked at his screen for a moment without seeing it. He thought about the parking garage on Wednesday. They'd arrived at approximately the same time, coincidentally, and had walked from the elevator to the building entrance in adjacent proximity because that was the direction, and he had held the door because a person was walking behind him, and it happened to be her. And they had exchanged maybe 12 words about the deployment timeline. That was the incident that warranted commentary. 12 words and a held door. He thought about how quickly that could become something else in the telling. He thought about Victoria and about what this kind of talk could do to a woman who had spent her career navigating the particular gauntlet of being a female executive in an industry that was looking for any available reason to undermine authority it hadn't chosen to grant in the first place. He thought about the specific way that stories about a powerful woman and a man who reports to her got told, and the directions those stories traveled, and what they left behind when they went. He thought about Lily, who went to school and had a life that was only as stable as his ability to maintain the conditions that kept it that way. He closed the code editor and opened a new document and stared at it for a while. He did not text Victoria. He did not need to. She called him at 6:30 that evening, which was the first time she'd called rather than texted since the night of the storm. He was in the kitchen. Lily was at the table doing her reading assignment with the focus of someone who had been promised the colored marshmallow cereal as a post-homework reward. He stepped into the hallway. I assume Priya talked to you, Victoria said. No preamble. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was operating in a mode she didn't enjoy, controlled in a way that cost something. This afternoon, Dylan said. I found out from my EA an hour ago. Apparently it's been circulating for at least a week. A brief pause. I want you to know that I'm addressing it. How? I'm meeting with James Whitfield tomorrow morning. James Whitfield was the COO, Victoria's structural peer in the Meridian hierarchy, and the person most responsible for the organizational culture she'd been navigating since her arrival. I'm not going to let this sit. Victoria, Dylan kept his voice level, mindful of the open kitchen doorway behind him. What exactly are people saying? Priya gave me the soft version. The pause this time was different in quality, heavier. That the resource approvals are biased, that I'm managing your projects with preferential engagement. Another pause. That you stayed at my house the night of the storm. He went still. How does anyone know that? I don't know. My assistant knew I'd called for a ride that night. She may have mentioned it, or someone saw your car. Her voice was steady, but he could hear something underneath the steadiness, something controlled and not fully resolved. It's not... What they're saying isn't explicit. It's the suggestion of impropriety, the implication, which is in some ways worse because it can't be directly addressed. Yes, it can, Dylan said. Can it? You address it by being clear about what happened and what didn't, by not retreating, by making it boring. He hadn't planned to say any of that, but it came out with the certainty of something he actually believed. If you go quiet on this, it grows in the space you leave. If you address it like it's a non-issue, because it is a non-issue, there's nothing for it to feed on. Silence. That's easier to say from your position, Victoria said carefully. I know, you have more to lose from the optics. I have built this professional standing over 15 years, Dylan. I know exactly what this kind of talk does to women at my level. I've watched it happen to others, and I've managed the aftermath, and I am very aware that the bar for this to become genuinely damaging is considerably lower for me than it is for you." He didn't argue with that. It was true, and he knew it was true, and arguing would have been the wrong response. "Then tell me what you need," he said instead. Another pause. Longer this time. He could hear, faintly, the sounds of her house in the background, the quality of a large, quiet space. "I don't need anything," she said, and he could hear that she was trying to mean it and not entirely succeeding. "I can manage this. I know you can. I just—" She stopped. Something in her voice shifted, just slightly, the professional register dropping by a fraction. "I wanted you to know before you walked in tomorrow and heard it differently. I wanted it to come from me." He stood in his hallway with that for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "Go be with your daughter," she said, and then, very quietly, "I'm sorry for the complication. Victoria." "Stop apologizing for the storm," he said. The silence that followed had a texture he couldn't name, something between surprise and something softer that he wasn't going to try to identify because that was not the moment for it. "Good night, Dylan," she said. "Good night." He went back to the kitchen. Lily had finished her reading assignment and was sitting with her chin in her hand looking at the ceiling with an expression of profound philosophical consideration. "What are you thinking about?" Dylan asked, sitting down. "Whether dinosaurs knew they were dinosaurs," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean? Like, did they know they were called dinosaurs, or did they just think they were regular?" Dylan considered this seriously, because Lily's questions deserved serious consideration even when, especially when, they arrived sideways. "They probably just thought they were regular," he said. "That's sad. Or it's better. If you think you're regular, you're not worried about being extraordinary." Lily turned this over. "Like how you think you're a regular dad, but actually you're pretty good at it?" He looked at her. At the Planet pajamas, which she had apparently put on directly after school because she had opinions about the comfort hierarchy of various garments, and at the reading assignment now closed on the table, and at the cereal she was waiting for without complaint because she had an agreement, and she trusted the agreement. "The cereal," he said, and got up. "Extra marshmallows," she said immediately. "That's not how cereal works." "How does cereal work?" "You get the amount of marshmallows that are in the box." "But what if I want more?" "Then we discuss it during cereal redistribution negotiations, which happen quarterly." She stared at him. "What's quarterly?" "Every 3 months. That's forever." "That is in fact not forever." She ate her cereal. Dylan sat across from her and drank his coffee and let the ordinary mechanics of his ordinary evening do what they did best, which was to be reliable and real and specifically themselves, and not to be anything else. And if there was a thing running underneath the evening, a conversation that was still sitting in the air of the hallway, a complication that would need to be walked into tomorrow morning, he let that be underneath. It could wait. Lily could not, and she was here, and that was the fact that mattered most. The morning came. He had dressed carefully without intending to, which he noticed and then decided not to analyze. He dropped Lily at school. She ran in without looking back. Purple boots, one slightly higher sock, the backpack with the small keychain dinosaur attached to the zipper that she'd selected from a gift shop 3 months ago and which she called Gerald 2, a fact that Dylan had not told the office and did not plan to. And he drove to Meridian through gray December air and parked and took the elevator to 22. He was at his desk by 8:40. The floor was not yet fully populated, the early hour providing a quality of quiet that would be gone by 9. He made coffee, opened his code editor, and prepared to be exactly as he always was. Visible, competent, unremarkable in the right ways. The first indication that something had shifted in the atmosphere came from the way 2 colleagues on the far side of the floor looked at him when he walked to the coffee station at 9:15, not overtly, not dramatically, just the quick redirect of attention that meant they had been discussing something and his presence was relevant to it. He collected his coffee. He went back to his desk. He opened his PR queue. Marcus arrived at 9:30 and sat down and said nothing, which was in itself information. "Just say it," Dylan said without looking up. "People are being stupid," Marcus said. I want you to know that I think people are being stupid. Thank you. Is there anything to it? Marcus asked, and the question was careful, not prurient, genuinely careful. The question of someone who was asking because he was concerned rather than because he wanted material. Dylan looked at him. She offered a colleague a ride home during a dangerous storm. He accepted. That's it. Marcus held his gaze. Okay, he said. That's actually it, Marcus. I believe you. And he did, Dylan thought. Or he believed the statement, which was true, and extended the benefit of the doubt to everything the statement was adjacent to, which was what a friend did. What's being said is ugly, Marcus continued, and it's unfair to her specifically. You know that, right? I know that. Because there are 3 male executives on this floor, and none of them have ever had their resource approvals interrogated for personal motivation. Marcus's voice was quieter than usual, the easy lightness gone. Whitfield has had dinner with 4 of his direct reports this year. Nobody's writing a Slack thread about it. Dylan nodded. He had thought about this last night, lying awake in the particular way that problems requiring honesty kept him awake. He had thought about the architecture of it, how the scrutiny was shaped, where it landed, who it stuck to. I know, he said again. So what are you going to do? My job, Dylan said. Correctly and visibly, which is all I can do. Marcus considered this. And her? She's meeting with Whitfield this morning. She'll handle it. You trust her to handle it. Dylan looked at his screen. She's the most capable person in this building, he said. So, yes. Marcus seemed to sit with that for a moment. Then he went back to his own desk, and Dylan went back to his code, and the floor filled up around them. And the day began in the particular way that days begin when something is different, but nothing has officially changed yet. A kind of held breath, a tension in the atmosphere that everyone was pretending wasn't there because naming it would require doing something about it. At 11 a.m., Dylan received a calendar invite from James Whitfield's assistant for a one-on-one at 2 p.m. that afternoon. The subject line said, Check-in, Project Infrastructure and Team Dynamics, which was the corporate language for, we need to talk and we're not going to say about what in the subject line. He accepted the invite. He did not tell Marcus. He spent the next 2 hours finishing a code review with the concentrated discipline of someone who had decided that the work was the only thing he could control right now and was therefore going to control it extremely well. The review was thorough and documented, and when he submitted it, he felt the small, clean satisfaction of a thing completed properly. And then he went to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. He looked fine. He looked tired in the way he usually looked tired, the permanent low-grade tiredness of someone who ran at a slight deficit of sleep and had for 2 years. He looked like a man who was about to go talk to a senior executive about something that was being framed as a professional matter and was actually, under the framing, something more personal and more fragile and more susceptible to the careless handling that institutional conversations tended to apply to things they didn't have the right forms to classify. He went back to his desk. James Whitfield's office was on the 24th floor, in the section reserved for executive leadership that had its own kitchen, its own conference rooms with names that were cities instead of numbers, and a view of the city that was deliberately better than the view on 22. It was the kind of space designed to make the power differential legible without stating it. Whitfield himself was 51, trim, the kind of executive who had been in leadership long enough that authority had settled into him like something he no longer thought about. It was just how he stood. He was not unkind. He was not particularly warm. He was the kind of competent that had been optimized for institutional outcomes rather than human ones, which was its own category of competent and not without value. Dylan, he said, standing to shake hands. Thanks for coming up. Of course, Dylan said, and sat. Whitfield sat across from him. There was no laptop open, no notepad. This was a conversation, not a record. Dylan noted this. I'll be direct, Whitfield said. I had a meeting this morning with Victoria about some concerns that have come up around dynamics in the infrastructure team. I want to hear your perspective as well. I appreciate that, Dylan said. Is there anything you want to share proactively? Dylan had thought about this conversation. He had run several versions of it on the drive-in this morning, testing different approaches, different registers. He had decided on one. I gave a colleague a ride home during a severe weather event, he said, because she was stranded and the roads were dangerous. It was late and the storm was getting worse, so I waited it out in the guest room before driving home in the morning. That's what happened. I understand how it's being characterized by some people. That characterization is not accurate. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. And your working relationship with Victoria, with Ms. Langford, since she joined? Professional, Dylan said. She's a rigorous and highly effective executive lead. She's pushed my work in directions that have improved it. I respect her professionally. She's given your team preferential resource allocation. She's approved well-reasoned requests with clear justification. If that reads as preferential, the comparison is probably to requests that were less well-reasoned. He said this evenly, without heat. My Q4 request had a 3-page justification and a cost-benefit analysis. I can share it with you if that's useful. Whitfield studied him. It wouldn't be the first time a working relationship developed in ways that complicated a professional environment. That's true, Dylan said. And if that were what was happening here, I'd expect you to address it. But it's not what's happening, so I'd ask you to be careful about the difference between the concern and the evidence for it. The office was quiet. Whitfield leaned back slightly. You're direct, he said. You said you'd be direct first. Dylan met his eyes. I'm following your lead. Something shifted in Whitfield's expression. Not disapproval, but recalibration. The specific look of a man who has had enough conversations to know when he's being handled and when he's being addressed, and who can tell the difference. Dylan was doing the latter, which was either admirable or inconvenient depending on where you were sitting. The concerns that have been raised, Whitfield said, come from specific people. I'm not going to share names. I'm not asking for names. But the intent is constructive. There's a real question about whether the working environment is comfortable for everyone on the team, given the perception. The perception being that 2 senior colleagues had an appropriate professional interaction during a weather emergency and have continued to work effectively together since. The perception being that there may be a personal relationship influencing professional decisions. Dylan looked at him steadily. Is there any specific professional decision you can point to that was influenced inappropriately? Whitfield was quiet. Because if there is, Dylan said, I want to know about it and address it. If there isn't, then we're managing a rumor, and I'd suggest the way to manage a rumor is to be clear that the organization doesn't treat speculation as evidence. Another silence. Whitfield's expression was unreadable in the way that executives' expressions got unreadable when they were deciding something they weren't going to announce in the room. I appreciate your candor, he said finally. I appreciate yours, Dylan said. We'll leave it here for now. I'd ask you to be mindful of optics going forward. I'm always mindful of optics, Dylan said. What I won't do is change my professional behavior because of what someone might incorrectly infer from it. Whitfield nodded once, in the way of someone who has heard the answer they expected and are processing what to do with it. Thank you for coming up, Dylan. Thank you for asking me directly, Dylan said, and meant it, and stood and left. The elevator back to 22 was empty. He stood in it and looked at the floor numbers descending and let himself, for exactly the duration of that descent, feel the thing he had not let himself feel during the conversation, which was the low-grade fury of being asked to account for something that had not happened while the people asking had never been asked to account for any of the things that had. The fury was there, and it was legitimate, and he knew what to do with it, which was to name it privately and then set it down, because fury was not useful in this particular landscape, and he knew that from experience. The elevator opened. He went back to his desk. Gerald the cactus was slightly more gray than yesterday. Dylan looked at it for a moment, then opened his desk drawer and found the small spray bottle he'd bought after reading the article Victoria had sent and had been using 3 times a week for 2 weeks. He gave Gerald a precise, measured amount of water. Not too much, not too little. He had read that overwatering was the most common way to kill a cactus. People watered them out of anxiety rather than need, and the excess was what did the damage. He went back to his code. Marcus appeared at 4 p.m. How did it go? Fine, Dylan said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. He looked at Marcus. I said what needed to be said. Whitfield heard it. We'll see what happens. And Victoria? She handled her side of it herself. Dylan picked up his coffee mug. She doesn't need me to handle it for her. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. You know what's strange, he said, is that before she got here, you would have handled this by going so quiet nobody could see you. You would have become invisible until it passed. Dylan did not have an immediate response to that. Now you went upstairs and told Whitfield to look at the evidence, Marcus said. That's different. It's the correct response. Sure, but it's still different. Dylan looked at his screen. The code review queue had 3 more items. He had a deployment check at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Gerald needed water again in 2 days. Lily was doing a Christmas pageant at school next Friday, and he had promised to take the afternoon off, which he had already blocked in his calendar in the way that blocked time for a child's school event existed on a different level of importance than blocked time for anything else. These were the facts of his life. Concrete, specific, his. People are going to think what they want, Dylan said, finally. I can't control that. I can control what's actually true. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, is she okay? Victoria, I mean. This kind of talk, for her, she's handling it, Dylan said. She's better at handling difficult things than most people in this building will ever know. He believed this. He had watched her for 3 weeks, and he had known her in the particular way you know someone when you've seen them outside the context in which they perform their competence. And what he knew was that underneath the precision and the efficiency and the level gaze, there was someone who had been doing this, holding the line, managing the perceptions, navigating the specific exhaustion of being exactly who she was in the specific environment she operated in for a very long time, and doing it largely without complaint and certainly without asking for acknowledgement. He respected that. In the particular way that you respect something you understand because you have done a version of it yourself, in a different arena, for different reasons. The solo management of things that would have been easier shared, the maintenance of a face that asked nothing of anyone watching it. They were alike in this, he thought. Not in circumstance. Her life and his were structurally different in ways that mattered, but in the particular posture, the way of carrying things without putting them down where others could trip on them. He thought about the smile. He thought about the kitchen and the onion and the word stillness and the message thread on his phone that was still open, unarchived, and that had been quiet since yesterday evening when she told him she was addressing it, and he told her to stop apologizing for the storm. He thought about all of it, briefly, and then set it down in the way you set things down that are worth picking up again when the moment is right, which this was not. Right now, the moment called for the code review queue, and Gerald's recovery, and Lily's pageant next Friday, and the December deployment that was 6 working days away, and the specific discipline of being exactly what he was, a senior engineer, a competent professional, a single father with a dying cactus and a daughter who named everything, in a way that was so legible and so consistent that there was nothing in it for speculation to hold on to. He opened the first code review. Somewhere on the 24th floor, or perhaps already in her car heading up the West Hills Road, Victoria Langford was doing the same kind of thing in her own way, holding the line, being exactly what she was, refusing to flinch. He was almost certain of it. He was, he realized, also certain of something else, something that had been assembling itself in the background of the last 3 weeks without announcing its progress, and that was now present enough that ignoring it required active effort rather than passive inattention. He was certain that whatever this was, whatever they were accumulating, slowly and carefully, and without declaration, in the space between their professional selves and the kitchen and the text messages and the Thursday storm, it was real. Not imagined, not performed, not the projection of a man who hadn't wanted anything in 2 years and was therefore vulnerable to wanting the first interesting thing that arrived. Real, specific, fragile in the way that real things are fragile. And fragile things, Dylan Carter had learned at some cost, required patience and care and the particular discipline of not reaching for them before the moment was right. He was not reaching, but he was watching, steadily. The way he watched everything that mattered to him, with the full attention Marcus had noticed, the 100% presence, anchored in the specific facts of right now. Gerald sat on the windowsill. The spray bottle was in the drawer. The code review queue had 3 items. The dinosaur drawing on his monitor watched the room with the cheerful, imprecise confidence of a 6-year-old who had decided her work was good and had not asked anyone's permission for that assessment. Dylan started the first review. The floor hummed around him. The December sky outside was the particular gray of a city that has decided winter is here and is not apologizing for it. Somewhere in the city, Lily was in her classroom narrating her own actions in the third person during art class, which was theatrical, but also, he thought, not entirely unlike her father, who was sitting very still at his desk and watching a situation unfold with a calmness that was mostly genuine and partly constructed and entirely, necessarily, his. The December deployment went live on a Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., which meant Dylan was at his desk by 5:45 with bad vending machine coffee and the specific alertness of someone who had slept adequately but lightly, the way you sleep when something important is happening at an hour that doesn't care about your schedule. The deployment was clean. Not perfectly clean. There was a 15-minute lag in one of the secondary services that required a quick configuration fix and 2 tense Slack messages between Dylan and the ops team. But clean enough that by 8 a.m., when the rest of the floor arrived, it was done and stable, and the monitoring dashboard was showing green across every metric that mattered. Dylan leaned back in his chair and drank the bad coffee and felt the flat, quiet satisfaction of a thing completed under pressure without falling apart. Victoria sent him a message at 8:12, not on his personal phone. On Slack, the official channel, visible to the team. Infrastructure deployment successful. Strong execution from the entire team, particularly the fallback protocol, which performed exactly as designed. Well done. It was addressed to the team. It named no one individually. It was, by any measure, a standard deployment acknowledgement from a lead to her team. Marcus read it and looked at Dylan. Dylan looked at his screen. Neither of them said anything, which was its own kind of conversation. The day after the deployment, Victoria called a full team meeting. Not a review, an actual meeting in the large conference room on 22, everyone on the infrastructure and product teams together, which had not happened since her first week, and which generated the specific low-level anxiety of a summons without a stated agenda. Dylan arrived early and took a seat in the middle of the table, not at the end where he could disappear, and not at the front where he could be read as positioning. He set his laptop open, his coffee to the right, and he waited. People filed in. There was the usual settling, chairs adjusted, laptops opened, the ambient noise of 20-something people finding their places. Priya sat down across from Dylan and gave him a look that meant she didn't know what this was about either. Marcus sat beside Dylan and immediately opened a document and pretended to read it. Victoria walked in at 9 on the dot, which was when she always arrived at things, and she stood at the head of the table and waited for the room to settle. And it did, because room settled for her. "I'm going to be direct," she said, which was how she started most things, and which by now everyone in the room knew meant they were about to hear something that was real and would require a real response. "There has been unprofessional conduct in this workplace over the past 2 weeks. I am referring to speculation about colleagues spread through informal channels that has no factual basis and that I will not tolerate continuing." The room was very quiet. I'm not going to name names or catalog specific comments because that would extend the conversation in directions that don't serve anyone. What I am going to say is this. She looked around the room with the specific evenness of someone who is making eye contact with everyone and no one in particular. This team operates on the basis of work. What you build, how you build it, how you support each other in building it. That is the basis. Not speculation about your colleagues' personal lives, not gossip run through Slack channels or over lunch or in the parking garage, not the particular kind of commentary that targets specific people. And I want to be clear that I am aware of the shape of what has been circulating, and the shape is not acceptable. Dylan kept his eyes on the table in front of him, not because he was uncomfortable, but because he understood that looking around the room right now would turn him into a data point in the conversation she was deliberately keeping general. If anyone has a genuine professional concern about a decision made on this team, a resource allocation, a project prioritization, a performance review, there are correct channels for that concern, and I expect them to be used. What I do not expect and will not accommodate is the substitution of speculation for those channels. She paused briefly, with the precision of someone who pauses intentionally. We are in the middle of Q1 planning. The infrastructure roadmap has 3 major initiatives that need this team's full capacity. I need everyone in this room working, not narrating the working of other people. Another pause. Questions? The room remained quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people who wanted to speak and weren't, but the specific quiet of people who had heard something and were still sitting with it. Then Derek Holt, from the product side, mid-40s, the kind of person who had been at the company long enough to feel entitled to the space he took up, leaned forward slightly. I think people are just trying to make sure the team is operating with, appropriate relationships in place. Victoria looked at him. It was not a hostile look. It was, if anything, completely neutral, which was somehow worse. Can you be specific about what that means? She said. Derek shifted. Just that, some people felt like certain decisions this quarter have been made based on Derek. Her voice didn't change in volume or temperature. I'm asking you to be specific. What decisions? What evidence? If you have something concrete, I want to hear it. If you don't, then I'd ask you to think carefully about what you're putting into the room right now. The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous one. Dylan, who was still looking at the table, could feel it. The particular pressure of a room recalibrating, of people revising what they'd been about to say against what had just been modeled for them. Derek said nothing further. Good, Victoria said. Then we're moving to Q1 planning. I'll have the roadmap document in the shared drive by end of day today. I want each team lead's preliminary input by Friday morning. She looked at the room one more time. We have serious work to do. Let's do it. The meeting ended. Dylan gathered his laptop and coffee and moved toward the door with the rest of the room. He was almost through it when Victoria said, "Carter, a minute." He stopped. Let the rest of the room file out. Marcus passed him with the expression of someone filing information and having the grace to do it quietly. When the room was empty, Victoria closed the door and stood at the end of the table, not performing anything, just standing. "How are you doing?" she said. Not with the professional inflection, with the other one. "Fine," he said. And then, because he had given her a hard time about that word, "Actually fine. The deployment went well. Whitfield hasn't followed up. Things feel manageable." She nodded. She looked slightly tired. Not visibly to most people, he thought, but he had been paying close enough attention for long enough now that he could see the traces of it. The December cadence was brutal even in normal circumstances, and the last 2 weeks had not been normal circumstances. "Derek's going to be a problem," she said. It was an assessment, not a complaint. "Derek's always been a problem. He was a problem before you got here." Dylan set his laptop down on the table. "He'll back down. He backed down in there. He backed down because I pushed. He won't stay backed down." "Then you push again." He met her eyes. "You're very good at pushing." She almost smiled. The almost smile was by now so familiar that he had stopped noting it and started simply receiving it as the information it was, which was that she was present and engaged and at some level more comfortable than she was willing to formally announce. "The meeting was the right call," he said. "I know it was the right call. I'm asking if it was the right execution." He thought about it, genuinely. "Yes. You were direct without being punitive. You named the behavior without naming people. You gave Derek a chance to bring something real, and he didn't have anything real, which is the point. It makes the next time he tries it harder." Dylan picked up his laptop. "It was well executed." "From the person who had the most stake in it," she said. Not defensively, just noting. "Maybe. But I work with you enough to know when you've done something correctly, and that was correct." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Lily's pageant is today." He stopped. He had not mentioned the pageant to her, not in any work context. He looked at her. "You have it blocked in your calendar," she said. "I saw it when I was scheduling the Q1 planning kickoff. I almost put the kickoff at 2 p.m., and then I saw the block. You moved your kickoff for Lily's pageant. I scheduled around an existing commitment. That's just calendar management." She said this in the tone of someone who was absolutely doing more than calendar management and was choosing not to acknowledge it. Dylan looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "She's doing a speaking part," he said. "One line. She's been practicing it for 3 weeks." "What's the line?" He hesitated. Then, "She's playing a narrator. The line is, 'And the world was full of wonder, if only you remembered to look.'" Something moved across Victoria's face, real and quick and then composed. "That's a good line," she said. "She thinks so too. She delivers it very seriously." "Good instinct." She picked up her own laptop from where she'd set it at the head of the table. "Go see it." "I wasn't going to miss it." "I know." She moved toward the door. "I know you weren't." He left the office at 1:30, which gave him time to make it to Eastside Elementary by 2:15. The pageant was in the gymnasium, which smelled of floor wax and the particular warmth of too many parents in a small space. And the folding chairs were arranged in rows, and every single one of them had a parent or grandparent or someone who had taken an afternoon off work to be there. And Dylan found a seat in the 4th row and put his coat on his lap and waited. Lily spotted him when her class came in. She was wearing the costume she'd been describing for a week, a blue dress and a paper star on a headband, which was her own addition to the narrator costume, and which Miss Patterson had apparently decided to permit. And when she saw him, she gave him a wave that was minimal in scale but significant in feeling, the wave of someone who had been uncertain he'd make it and was now confirming he had. And Dylan raised his hand back with the same minimalism and watched her take her place. She delivered the line perfectly, not in the sense of perfect diction or perfect timing. She said it slightly too fast, the way she said most things when she was nervous, and she looked at her feet for part of it before finding the audience, but in the sense of meaning it. She said it like she believed it, and the world was full of wonder, if only you remembered to look. And then she looked up and found him in the 4th row, and her face did the thing it did when she was trying not to smile too broadly on stage, which was to compress into a very serious expression that communicated enormous satisfaction. He drove her home afterward, and she talked the entire way about the pageant with the specific energy of someone debriefing an important event, and he listened to all of it. And they got takeout from the Thai place on Burnside because it was Friday, and Lily ate her pad Thai with the focused devotion of a person communing with her personal identity. And Dylan ate his curry and felt the particular weight of a week that had been genuinely hard beginning, slowly, to lift. Later, after Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his phone and looked at the message thread. He typed, "She nailed it." Delivered the line like she'd been performing for years. He sent it. 3 minutes later, obviously, she's been practicing for 3 weeks. Preparation is everything. She looked at her feet for the first 4 words. Everyone looks at their feet for the first 4 words. The point is, she looked up. Dylan looked at that for a moment. "Yeah," he typed. She did. A pause, then, "Good. Merry Christmas, Dylan." He looked at that too, at the specificity of his name at the end of it. "Merry Christmas, Victoria." He put his phone down and looked at the kitchen. The dishes drying beside the sink, the drawings on the counter, Gerald on the windowsill, which was no longer gray. It had been, he realized, almost 3 weeks since he'd started watering it properly, and Gerald was not fixed exactly, but wasn't worse, and was perhaps, in the way of things that are getting better slowly, slightly better than before. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The week between Christmas and New Year's was the quiet week. The week the city ran at half speed and the office ran at half of that. The skeleton crew of people without holiday plans or with the kind of work that didn't pause for sentiment. Dylan was in the office 3 of those days, Lily at her grandmother's in Eugene, his mother, who had taken her for 4 days every December since the divorce, with a consistency that Dylan had come to depend on in the way you depend on things that are reliable precisely because so much else isn't. The office in that week had a different quality. Fewer people meant less noise, meant the work itself had more room. Dylan worked well in that room. He always had. He was the kind of engineer who could go deep in stretches of uninterrupted time, following a problem through its layers with the patient attention that most of his colleagues maintained for shorter spans. And the quiet week gave him that in spades. Victoria was in the office too. He had not expected this. He had assumed, without interrogating the assumption, that she would have somewhere to be, someone to be with. Holiday plans that took her out of Portland and back to San Francisco, or to family and whatever iteration that took for her. But she was there, on the 23rd floor when he arrived on the 26th, and she was there on the 27th, and by the 28th it had stopped being a surprise and become simply a fact, the way her presence in the building had stopped being noteworthy and become part of the architecture of the place. They talked more that week than they ever had in the office. Not about work, or not only about work. The quiet of the building permitted a register that the regular week's noise didn't. She stopped at his desk on the afternoon of the 27th with a coffee she'd clearly made at the good machine and set it in front of him without comment, which was such an exact mirror of a thing he did for Lily. Not asking if you want something, just providing the thing you need because you can see that you need it. That he looked up at her with an expression he didn't have time to fully assemble. "You've been staring at that screen for 3 hours," she said. "It's a complex problem." "It's always a complex problem." She sat in the chair across from his desk, the chair Marcus usually occupied, with a naturalness that was notable because she didn't sit in other people's workspace typically. She maintained a clear spatial grammar in the office, a respect for territory. This was different. "What is it?" He explained it. The service dependency issue that had been masked by the deployment and that he'd uncovered in the post-deployment audit. A latency problem that was currently minor and would become significant in 3 to 6 months if the user load scaled as projected, which it would. He explained it in the way he explained things to people he thought were actually going to engage with what he was saying, which was completely without the simplifications he applied to conversations where he sensed the engagement was performative. She engaged with it completely. She asked 3 questions, each one going one level deeper than the previous, and on the third one, she leaned forward slightly with the look she got when something had caught her interest. The full attention look, the one he'd first seen in the architecture review, and said, "Is this a new problem or a pre-existing one that the deployment revealed?" Pre-existing. The deployment didn't create it, it just made it legible. So it was always there, just not visible until the conditions changed. She was quiet for a moment, looking at his screen. Then she looked at him, and something in the look was both about the code and not about the code, and Dylan let it be both without pulling it apart. "Add it to the Q1 roadmap," she said. "Priority Tier 2. I want a full technical brief by the end of January." "Already drafting it." She smiled. Properly this time. Not the almost smile, not the contained one. The full one. The same one that had appeared in her kitchen on a storm Thursday 2 months ago, the one that happened when she wasn't entirely managing its arrival. It lasted a few seconds and then settled into something quieter but still present, and she picked up her coffee and stood. "You're a very good engineer, Dylan," she said. "You've said that before." "It bears repeating." She moved toward the corridor. "Go home at a reasonable hour. It's the quiet week." "You're still here," she paused. "I'm not great at quiet weeks." "Neither am I," he said. "Lily's at my mom's. The apartment is very quiet." She turned, and for a moment they were just looking at each other across the empty open plan with its half-darkened screens and the gray Portland afternoon through the windows. And it was the specific moment that would have been easy to let become something if either of them had been in the business of letting things become something on the basis of a moment. They were both too careful for that. Or they were trying to be. "The Thai place on Burnside," he said. "The one Lily swears by. They do a lunch service during the quiet week. Good curry." Victoria looked at him. "Is that an invitation?" "It's information," he said. "What you do with information is your business." A beat. Then, "Tomorrow, 12:30. 12:30, he said. She went back to the 23rd floor. Dylan looked at his screen. The latency problem was still there, patient as ever, waiting for him to build the solution that would make it go away. He worked for another 2 hours, until the light outside had gone fully dark and the building was down to its overnight skeleton, and then he put on his coat and took the elevator down. The Thai place on Burnside was the kind of restaurant that had no interest in being discovered. It had been in the same location for 11 years, had a sign that was missing the second A in Thai, and served food that was, by any legitimate assessment, significantly better than its exterior suggested. Lily had identified it 2 years ago by the simple method of pointing at it from the car window and insisting, with a conviction that had proved itself warranted. Victoria was there when Dylan arrived at 12:32, already at a table near the window with a glass of water and her phone face down on the table, which was a thing she did. He'd noticed it in the kitchen during the storm, too, when she was deciding to be present somewhere rather than elsewhere. He sat across from her. "You've been here before," he said. "Once. Before the storm, actually. I was doing a neighborhood walk." She looked at the menu. "I remember the curry." Lily's position is that the pad thai is the only legitimate order. Lily's position sounds well-reasoned. Everything Lily does is well-reasoned. It's slightly alarming. Victoria looked up from the menu with the full smile, unhidden, already there. She gets it from somewhere. Dylan looked at the menu so she couldn't see whatever his face was doing. They ordered, they ate. The restaurant had 4 other tables occupied and a pleasant noise level, and the window showed Burnside in its December configuration. People in coats, Christmas lights still up in a few of the storefronts, the city running at its reduced holiday pace. It was, by most measures, an entirely ordinary lunch. It was also the first time they had shared a meal in public, not in a storm-stranded kitchen, not in a professional conference room, in a restaurant, at a table, in the world. Neither of them named this, but it was present in the room, in the particular self-consciousness that attends a thing being done for the first time in a new context, the slight adjustment of register, the awareness that this was different from the previous things, even if it looked, from the outside, like 2 colleagues having lunch. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said in the second half of the meal. "You can ask," Dylan said. "What was it like? After your marriage ended, the first few months?" She held her fork but wasn't using it. "When it was just you and Lily." He thought about how to answer honestly without making it into more than she'd asked for. "Hard," he said, "in the specific way that things are hard when you've been operating as 2 and then you're 1. Not dramatic hard, logistics hard, figuring out the pickup schedules and the sick days and the things you didn't realize had been divided. Who called the pediatrician? Who tracked the school calendar?" He picked up his water glass. "And then there was the other kind of hard. The kind where it's 10 p.m. and she's asleep and the apartment is quiet, and you're sitting with the fact that you chose this city and this life, and you're going to keep choosing it, even though the version you'd originally designed it for doesn't exist anymore." Victoria was quiet. She was listening in the way she listened, fully, without preparing her response. "That part got better," Dylan said. "Not because the facts changed, because I got better at the facts." "How long did that take?" "Longer than I wanted, less long than I feared." He set down the glass. "Why are you asking?" She looked at the table for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said, in the car, the night of the storm, about the slow version of over sometimes being worse because you keep thinking it might still change." She looked up. "I've been in the slow version of something for a long time. Not a marriage, but a version of a life that I designed for a certain set of assumptions, and I've been maintaining it past the point where those assumptions were still accurate." "What changed?" he asked. "I moved here," she said simply. "You can't do a quiet assessment of a new city without doing a quiet assessment of yourself. I've been in San Francisco for 10 years. Everything there is so defined. Who I am there, what I do there, what I'm for. Here I'm—" She stopped. "Less defined. It's uncomfortable. It's also, I think, correct." Dylan looked at her, at the precision she brought to even this, the careful word choice, the refusal to be vague about things she'd thought through. "Less defined sounds like it suits you," he said, "from the outside." "Why?" "Because you're more yourself when you're less managed." He said it simply, not as a compliment, as an observation. "In the office, you're very good. Outside the office, you're, I don't know, more accurate. Like the managed version is a correct representation, but not a complete one." She looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant noise moved around them, ordinary and unhearing. "Nobody has said that to me before," she said. "That's surprising." "Is it?" "You're not that hard to read, once you've spent enough time looking. Most people don't spend enough time looking." "I know," Dylan said. "I noticed." The check came.
They split it without discussion, which was the right thing, and they both knew it.
They walked out onto Burnside into the December cold, and the city was doing its ordinary noon things around them, and they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the natural pause that follows a lunch that has been more than a lunch. "Thank you," Victoria said. "For what?" "For the recommendation." A beat. "For the conversation." "Thank you for asking," he said. "You don't have to earn things by way of gratitude." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I'm working on that." He nodded. She turned toward the parking garage, and he turned toward the block where he'd parked, and they went their separate directions the way two people go their separate directions when the ground between them is still being established and neither of them is going to rush the establishment. But that evening, sitting in the too-quiet apartment with Lily and Eugene and Gerald looking possibly less gray than last week, Dylan sat at the kitchen table and did not open his laptop. He sat with his coffee and looked at the refrigerator and at the space where the purple rain boots usually were and were not, and he let himself, with more honesty than he usually permitted, take stock of where things actually were. They were colleagues. That was true, and it was going to stay true because both of them were too careful and too aware of the cost of imprecision to let it stop being true. He respected her professionally with a completeness he hadn't given a senior figure since his first mentor 6 years ago. A man who had since retired and who had been the kind of engineer that made you raise your own standards by proximity. He respected her personally in the way you respect someone who doesn't ask for it and doesn't perform the absence of needing it. Someone who simply is what they are and is paid for being that and keeps paying. And there was the other thing. The thing that lived in the kitchen and the storm and the onion and the word stillness and the message thread and the lunch on Burnside and the full smile, and the way she said his name at the end of a message. The thing that was not a rumor, and was not an impropriety, and was not a professional complication, but was also not nothing, had never been nothing, from the first moment she'd stood beside his desk and said, "It's the cleanest piece of architecture in this code base," like she meant it because she meant it. He knew what it was. He'd known for a while, in the way you know things you're not saying. The not saying had been right, had been correct, had been the thing that protected the thing from being damaged by the wrong conditions. But the conditions were changing, slowly, with the reliable patience of things that were actually going to happen. The noise at the office had not destroyed them. The meeting had been the right call, and they had both held their ground, and the team had adjusted, and Whitfield had said nothing further, and Derek Holt had submitted his Q1 input by Friday morning like everyone else. The ground was still standing. Dylan drank his coffee. He thought about what Victoria had said. Less defined, more accurate. The quiet assessment of a new city and a new version of a life. He thought about himself 3 years ago, arriving in Portland with a marriage that was beginning its slow version of over, choosing this city for its rain and its reasonable cost of living and its distance from the places where the previous version of his life had happened. He had not designed the life he currently had. He had built it from the materials available after the design failed, which was a different kind of construction, less elegant, more durable, more his. He looked at Gerald. "You're doing better," he told the cactus. Gerald, consistent and uncommunicative, said nothing. Dylan finished his coffee. He was going to get Lily from his mother's on the 30th. He had a code review due the 2nd of January. He had a Q1 brief to write. He had a cactus that was recovering. He had a daughter who delivered lines like she meant them, and named everything, and had an imaginary cat called Kevin, and had decided at 6 years old, with the sovereign confidence of someone who had not yet learned to doubt her own perception, that the world was full of wonder if only you remembered to look. He had, sitting somewhere in the managed space between his professional life and the rest of it, a woman who was relearning how to be in a city, who cut onions in precise equal slices, who had smiled completely exactly twice in his presence, and both times it had been an accident, who sent him cactus care articles without commentary, and picked up her phone quickly, and had moved a scheduling kickoff without saying why. He was, for the first time in 2 years, not entirely sure the wall was still doing what he'd built it to do. He wasn't ready to take it down, but he was standing at it differently than before, not behind it, not pacing its length, just standing near it with both hands visible and looking at the door he'd built into it years ago and had never, until recently, had any reason to think about opening. It was still closed, but he knew where the key was. And that, for now, was enough. January arrived the way January always arrives in Portland. Without ceremony, with rain, with the particular flatness of a city that has exhausted its holiday sentiment and returned to the business of being itself. The decorations came down from the storefronts on Burnside. The office filled back up to its regular population. The Q1 roadmap landed in everyone's inbox on the 2nd, and the machinery of a new quarter started turning with the reliable indifference of machinery that does not care what you carried in from the previous year. Dylan came back from his mother's in Eugene on the 30th with Lily, who had eaten too many of her grandmother's cookies and had opinions about all of them ranked in order of preference, and who had acquired, somewhere during the 4 days, a new level of confidence about the Kevin situation. She presented this on the drive back with the methodical calm of someone who had been building a case and had decided the moment was right. "Grandma says cats are good for kids," Lily said. "Grandma has always had opinions about what's good for kids. She says they teach responsibility. You are 6. I am almost 7. In 4 months. 4 months is almost." Lily looked out the window at the highway, at the dark fields and the rain. "Kevin could teach me responsibility for 4 months, and then I'd be 7. Dylan drove. He was aware that he was losing this argument by geological erosion rather than direct assault, which was her preferred method. "We'll talk about Kevin in the new year," he said. "It is the new year. It's the 30th of December. Close enough." He did not get a cat in January. He did, however, find himself one Saturday afternoon when Lily was at a friend's birthday party, and he had 3 hours of uncharacteristic empty time, standing in front of a pet supply store on Northwest 23rd, looking at the window display with the expression of a man who was thinking about something he hadn't decided to think about yet. He went in. He bought better soil for Gerald and a new pot that was slightly larger, because the article Victoria had sent in November had said that cacti sometimes struggled when their root system had no room, and he had been thinking about this in the background for 2 months. He repotted Gerald on the kitchen table that afternoon with the methodical care of someone who had decided that this particular small thing was worth doing correctly. Gerald looked afterward like a cactus that had been given better conditions, not transformed, just given room. Dylan looked at him for a moment. Then he texted Victoria a photo. "Gerald has a new home," he typed. Her reply came in 4 minutes. "About time." He looked cramped. "You could tell from a photograph?" "I could tell from the original photograph. 3 months ago." "You didn't say anything. You were getting there," she replied. "Some things take the time they take." He looked at that for a long moment, in the kitchen that smelled of potting soil and the particular quiet of a Saturday afternoon without Lily in it, and he understood that she was not only talking about Gerald, and he understood that she knew he understood, and he understood that this was as close as either of them had come to saying the thing directly. He typed, "Do you want to have dinner this week?" He looked at it. He did not add his colleagues or to discuss the Q1 roadmap or any of the softening qualifications he'd spent 3 months applying to things that didn't require them. He sent it as it was. The reply took longer this time. Not long, but longer. 2 minutes, which for Victoria, who answered messages with the efficiency of someone who had decided to answer them, was notable. "Thursday," she wrote. 7 o'clock. "There's a place on Overton I've been wanting to try. I'll send the address." "Thursday," he typed back. He put his phone in his pocket and went to pick up Lily from the birthday party, which she reported had featured a magician who was okay but not great, and a cake that was objectively good. And he drove her home through the January rain and made dinner and did her bath and read her the chapter they were on in the book about the girl who discovered she could talk to animals, Lily's current obsession, which she was taking as both entertainment and instruction manual. And when she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and did not open his laptop and did not look at his phone and just sat in the quiet of his own life for a while. He thought about the wall. He thought about the door he'd built into it and the key he'd known the location of for months. He thought about the cost of building things to protect yourself from things that had already happened, how the protection didn't disappear the threat. It just made you smaller in relation to it. He thought about 2 years of managing, precisely, the radius of what he let matter to him, and about how the management had been correct for a period,
and had then, somewhere around the night of the storm, started to cost more than it protected. He was not going to dismantle the wall. He was not built for that kind of wholesale demolition, and he didn't think it was actually what the situation required. Some of what he'd built was structural: the routines for Lily, the professional discipline, the capacity to be his own floor on the days when there was nothing else to stand on. Those things were not walls. Those were foundation. But the part that was wall, the part that kept him in the calculated radius, that made him say fine when he meant something more specific, that had spent 2 years routing everything through the sensible and correct and manageable, that part was due for renegotiation. He knew this. He was, for once, not arguing with it. Thursday came. The restaurant on Overton was small, warm, the kind of place that had earned its reputation without pursuing it. Good food, no theater, lighting at the level where conversations felt private without requiring intimacy to justify itself. Victoria was there when he arrived, 3 minutes before 7, which was on time by anyone's measure and early by hers, and she was wearing something simple and dark, and was not wearing the working arrangement of her hair, which he had come to understand was information. She stood when he approached the table, which was a slightly formal gesture that landed as genuine rather than performative, and they did the small renegotiation that is the first minute of two people sitting down to a dinner that both of them know is different from lunch on Burnside. "You look nervous," she said, after they'd ordered drinks and the first minute had passed. "I'm not nervous," Dylan said. "You looked at the menu twice without reading it." He put the menu down. "I'm slightly nervous," he said. "It's fine." "It's fine," she said, with the dry precision of someone who had been given a hard time about that word on multiple occasions and was deploying it deliberately. He looked at her. She was almost smiling, the managed version, and then she stopped managing it and just smiled. And the particular thing that happened in his chest when she did, that was exactly what it had always been: specific, real, and not going anywhere. "This is a different thing," he said, simply, not as preamble to anything longer, just as a statement of fact. "Yes," she said, "I wanted to name it." "I know." She held her water glass. "I've been not naming it for a while. You've been not naming it too. We've both been very disciplined about not naming it. Exhaustingly so," she said, and the dryness of it made him laugh, a real one, surprised. And she looked at him with the expression of someone who had aimed for something and hit it. And for a moment they were just two people at a table in January who had spent 4 months being careful and were sitting with the relief of not having to be exactly right now. But then she set down her water glass, and her expression shifted to something more serious, and he knew this was coming because she did not let important things stay in the register of lightness. "I need to say something before this goes further," she said. "Okay. I am still your executive lead. That is not going to change in the near term, and probably not in the medium term, and I'm not going to engineer a reporting restructure just to make a personal situation more comfortable, because that would be exactly the kind of decision-making the office rumors were accusing me of, and I won't do it." "I know," Dylan said. "I'm not asking you to. I know you're not. I'm saying it anyway because I need it to be said clearly." She looked at him directly. "Whatever this is, and I'm not defining it tonight. I don't think tonight is the night for definitions. It has to coexist with what we are professionally. Not because I'm putting professional ahead of personal, because I don't accept the premise that they have to compete. We are both adults who are capable of maintaining the distinction." "We've been maintaining it for 4 months," Dylan said, "under significantly more difficult conditions than dinner at a restaurant," she said. "But yes," he nodded. "What about Whitfield? The optics?" "The optics were a problem when it was a rumor with no ground to stand on," she said. "Paradoxically, an actual relationship that's conducted with transparency and professionalism is less of a problem than a rumor, because it has a shape. Rumors are shapeless. They fill whatever space you leave." She paused. "I'm not saying it's going to be simple." "I know it's not going to be simple," Dylan said. "I have a daughter and a dying cactus and a job I need to keep. I have not been under the impression that any of this is simple." She looked at him. "Gerald is not dying. Gerald has been improving for 2 months." "Gerald is recovering," he conceded. "There's a difference." There is. He met her eyes. Victoria. I'm not looking for simple, he said. I had simple for 2 years. It's very quiet, and it's very manageable, and it's also... He searched for it. Not enough. I've known for a while that it's not enough. I just needed the right moment to stop pretending it was. She was very still across the table. The stillness that was specifically hers, the one he had learned to read as presence rather than distance. She was here, completely, in this. I'm not easy to be around, she said. I'm direct in ways that read as abrasive to people who prefer softness. I work too much. I have difficulty asking for things and more difficulty accepting them. I moved to a new city 4 months ago, and I don't have a social life outside of this restaurant, and one colleague I occasionally text about cacti. That colleague also texts you about birthday party piñatas, which I have appreciated more than I've said. I know. He looked at her. I'm not easy either. I'm guarded. I have a 6-year-old who narrates her own actions in the third person and wants an orange cat named Kevin and will absolutely have opinions about every new person in our life. He paused. And I need that to be okay. Not accommodated. Okay. She's not a complication I'm apologizing for. Victoria looked at him, and what was in her face was so unmanaged and clear that he almost looked away. Almost, but didn't. Dylan, she said. The first thing I thought when you told me about Lily was that she sounded like someone worth knowing. He sat with that. The dinosaur is still on my monitor, he said finally. I know, she said. I walk past it every day. The food came, and they ate, and the conversation found its way into the lighter territory that follows important things being said. Not because the important things were over, but because they had been placed correctly and could now be left to do their work. She told him about San Francisco, the version she'd left behind, the apartment she'd kept for 6 months after the acquisition before finally admitting she wasn't going back. The colleagues who had taken the leaving personally, the specific loneliness of succeeding at something and finding the success did not fill the square footage of your life the way you'd assumed it would. He told her about the year after the divorce that he hadn't told anyone about in its full dimension. Not the logistics, but the other part, the 10 p.m. part, the sitting with the facts of a redesigned life and deciding, without drama and without anyone to witness it, that he was going to build something worth living in from the materials that were left. Not because he was extraordinary, because Lily needed him to, and needing to was sometimes enough. She listened to all of it. He listened to all of hers. They left the restaurant at 10:15. The January air was cold and clean, the street quiet in the way of a weeknight past 10. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the natural pause, and this time it was different from Burnside, different from the storm driveway, different from every previous pause. Because this one didn't have the shape of an ending. It had the shape of something still going. Lily is with her mother this weekend, Dylan said. In Seattle. Is she? Saturday afternoon. If you wanted to... He stopped. He was not going to manage this into a logistical framing. I'd like to see you again outside the office, he said, before Thursday becomes the only day we do this. Victoria looked at him with the full look, unhidden. Saturday, she said. Come up to the house. I'll cook. You'll cut vegetables with engineer precision? I'll cut vegetables however I want in my own kitchen, she said, and it was so precisely, completely her that he laughed again, and she smiled again, and this time neither of them managed it, and it just was what it was on a January sidewalk in Portland with the rain holding off for once, and the city spread out below the West Hills in its ordinary, complicated beauty. Good night, Victoria, he said. Good night, Dylan, she said. They went their separate ways, but this time neither of them was holding anything back to keep the distance safe. They were just walking in the same direction on different streets. Saturday came. He drove up to the West Hills in the gray afternoon, past the gate that opened without drama, and she met him at the door in the gray sweater again. The soft one, the one from the night of the storm. And the house was warm, and the kitchen smelled of something that had been cooking for a while, which meant she had started before he arrived, which meant she had been preparing, which was the most Victoria thing she could have done. She had cooked an actual meal, not scrambled eggs, not storm rationing, a proper dinner, something braised and slow and real, with vegetables cut in the precise equal slices that she could not stop herself from producing, and which he had decided some time ago he found completely endearing. The kitchen was inhabited in a way it hadn't been in November. There were more things on the counter, signs of a person settling into a place rather than inhabiting it temporarily. The crossword was a different one. The succulent had been joined by two companions. The small plant that had been outperforming Gerald was now in a larger pot, given room. They cooked together in the way they had established in November, in comfortable proximity, each doing what needed doing without negotiating every step. He found things in the second place he looked rather than the first, which was marginally better than before. She let him adjust the seasoning without commenting on it. The radio was on, something low, and the rain had started outside, and the house was warm. They ate at the kitchen island because the dining table, she admitted, she had never actually used. It had come with the house, and she had been meaning to replace it with something she actually chose and had not gotten to it yet. This struck him as so human and so specific that he didn't say anything about it, just noted it as one of the things that went into his actual understanding of who she was, separate from the version the office saw. After dinner, they moved to the living room, to the sofa that faced the windows in the rain, not with ceremony, just the natural movement of an evening finding its next shape. She had a glass of wine. He had coffee. The bookshelves along the wall were more populated than in November. She'd been unpacking, apparently, slowly, in the way of someone who hadn't fully committed to a place until they decided to. "You're actually staying," he said, looking at the books. She followed his gaze. "The boxes have been in the spare room since September," she said. "I unpacked them last week." "What changed?" She was quiet for a moment, not in the way of avoiding the question, but in the way of finding the true answer rather than the quick one. "I stopped waiting for Portland to feel like a temporary assignment," she said. "At some point in December, I realized I was waiting for something to happen that would give me permission to be here. And I was waiting for it from, I don't know, external circumstances, the right quarter results, the team finding its rhythm." She set down her glass. "And then I thought, you're doing it again. You're managing from a distance instead of just being in the place." He understood this. He had done a version of it himself. The managed distance, the provisional commitment, the life held slightly at arm's length so it couldn't pull you off balance. "So you unpacked," he said. "I unpacked," she said. 47 boxes. It took most of a Sunday. "Do you feel better?" She considered this with the seriousness she gave all genuine questions. "I feel more here," she said. "Whether that's better depends on the day." Dylan looked at the rain on the windows. The same windows he'd seen from the driveway in November, lit from inside, a house that looked inhabited from a distance. From inside, he could see the city below, scattered and blurred, doing its January thing.